Yo, squad, finally back. Y'all ain't even know. So, yeah, it was like so much to happen today, but hopefully, we got like 3 more hours left of this. Hopefully, we ride this out and we get to like learn something out of this, I guess.
Was a tactical decision on his part. There was acknowledgement that this could go pear-shaped very quickly, but both seemed to have an understanding of the potential outcomes, intrepidly embracing them.
Let me start, from the frenemies. Yeah, right here. Because, I don't want to miss anything if I did.
In a way, frenemies was a concept that was constructed off Trisha and Ethan's established rapport. The fact that on one hand they'd had friendly conversations, they'd had productive discourse on certain matters, but they'd also had their fair share of drama and fallings out after they had seemingly reconciled. The question on many people's minds was how do you keep a podcast going with 2 people who may hate each other on a certain day, who may not talk for months? Well, money maybe, but even then, if you're not really committed to something, it tends to show.
Well, I mean, they come from a conservative family. If you knew their dad
he didn't like you. I knew that.
Yeah, he didn't like me. He thought I was crazy. I mean, imagine what they like, and you're like way crazier than I am.
Am I though? Because
I think so. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow.
However, in the first episode, there clearly was a commitment involved. They even had their own personalized set to contrast between the 2 creators, Ethan on that brooding dark side, and Trisha with their pink-spirited jollity. I mean, to be honest, that's not an accurate representation of their style, but I suppose that is the sort of energy they tend to emanate, at least. In the introduction, Ethan emphasized that these 2 were drawn together for that unique chemistry, seemingly debunking the idea that this was a tactical decision on his part. There was acknowledgement that this could go pear-shaped very quickly, but both seemed to have an understanding of the potential outcomes, intrepidly embracing them. And from the first minute of the first episode, that quirky chemistry that everyone seemed to identify was on exhibit.
And how big is it?
It's fine. It's fine.
Less than 5?
No.
4?
No, it's bigger than 4
5
and 5.
Do you measure?
I have when I was younger. I haven't measured it recently.
How many people have you had sex with in your life?
10.
Actually?
Yeah. How about you? Of 10 billion?
In a way, though, this time it was intended. It's not like Trisha didn't mean what they had said in the past. It meant that this environment was actively fostered in acknowledgement of its subsequent public release. A Frenemies episode is basically a compilation of the conversations you have with your friend. In all honesty, you'd be afraid to ever provide a public platform. But Trisha was that friend who already had the platform, so in a way, people almost felt more permitting, because it wasn't like they had much to gain from it. In return, Ethan had organically found an aspect for his podcast that he'd been desperately missing in the past, that raw chemistry.
I mean, I don't want to be chiseled. I just don't want to be like this. I don't have tits.
Right. I don't think you do. I saw you shirtless over there. He was changing shirtless.
I was covering my body.
No,
but thank you.
But you're on TikTok showing it. You don't seem self-conscious about your body.
No, I'm not.
I'm not either. Isn't that funny how like chubby people don't care? We're just like, whatever.
I mean, I don't think that's all chubby people, but I think we just have. Can I see some questions?
He'd finally shown his critics that he could actually do something that many doubted he could. I think the problem with his previous interviews was that Ethan and Ela aren't the best at starting conversation, and when dealing with more stoic guests, this tended to lead to some awkward interactions. Trisha was probably the most world-curious guest they had, and Trisha always provided Ethan with at least 10 zany comments to find one response to, which Ethan could always do. The highs yielded quality banter, excellent repartee, and chemistry for the ages. However, with the sunshine came the rain.
You guys were already kind of annoying me this weekend, and I'm like, honestly, I either break up with you guys or snap on you guys. One of the 2 will come eventually, but so far, so good.
Oh, well, hold on.
Surprisingly, the first 4 episodes went without major incident. However, the 5th...
Surprisingly, one of the 2 would happen. Well, we should have seen that coming, huh?
Billed as a Halloween special is where the greasy wheels appear to detach from the ramshackle machine. Trisha has a habit of going nuclear rather quickly, and I'll discuss why in a moment. But whenever they feel slightly attacked, they seem to fight back with 1,000 times the ferocity of that which was initially launched on them. In this case, during a discussion on transparency, Trisha brings up the subject of Ethan's substance abuse to prove that he's not as open as he claims. Ethan, feeling blindsided by this comment, accuses Trisha of weaponizing his problems against him. This strikes a nerve with Trisha, and it quickly goes downhill from there.
You overestimate your influence.
Oh, I know how you guys are with him. Oh my God, Trisha did this. Oh my God, Trisha did that. We should be scared of Trisha. It's like,
I've never said anything like that.
I've seen your group chats. I literally see his phone.
Well, you bragging about looking through his phone isn't exactly the best look.
I'm not bragging about it. I'm stating something because, once again, I'm open.
Well, I've never said anything like that. I'm trying to resolve this because...
The more we talk about it, the worse it's going to be. Like, good luck. Honestly, good luck. Thanks for having me on 5 episodes. Love it. It was so much fun. And I'm over it. Good luck. And I'm sorry about your family situation. I'm sorry about your situation.
No,
you're miserable.
No, it's
you
not
are.
true.
I can tell. I can tell. And it's sadness. And I see you when I was around your family that you have sadness in you, and it's sad.
Okay.
And that's why you're so mean to people on the internet, and I get it. But also, don't take it out on people and call them crazy and shit. Cool.
Well, we're going out on a high note here, folks. All for your viewing pleasure.
Just wire me for this later, and we'll talk never. Because I hate people just like that are you. You're the person I hate in this world.
Really?
That's so just offensive, but they do nothing wrong. And when people are provoked, oh, they're crazy, calling girls crazy and stuff like that, it's like, but taking no accountability, no responsibility. You think everything's just an attack against you. Everyone's against Ethan. Like, oh my gosh, I'm always right. It's like, ugh, you and Jax don't deserve each other, so.
Jax? Well, I can't believe you're going after Jax. He's such a sweet guy.
I love you.
All right, Trisha.
All right, bye. Thanks for the great episode.
It's quite a sight to behold, Ethan perched there in his Uncle Fester costume, but visuals aside, this did spawn a situation that clearly troubled those involved. For some, this would be drama, this would be funny, but for the podcast, this was the surfacing of a problem that has been present with Trisha for years, and it definitely brought into question whether this dynamic was healthy.
I'm going to try to do a post-mortem on this. I don't know, maybe she's having a bad day.
I haven't spoken about it too much yet, and I don't want to speak about too much in general, but Trisha has been quite open about their struggles with borderline personality disorder, a condition that alongside other symptoms can cause intense emotional instability and impulsivity in individuals affected by it. This
I do get she has been open about struggling with mental health, but it really doesn't excuse her to do all things that she does, all this terrible behavior that she does. Like she doesn't want to help herself because she knows that carrying out, her public, all the public dilemmas that she has, all these like feuds in all her personal life, she knows it gets her views. That's why, she's as big as she is, because she's basically like Tana Mojo. They basically aired out all their private life. Tana, she exaggerated her stories, but for some reason it's entertaining to some people. I mean, I could see why, but like, I don't know. I'm confused.
has obviously been
about
demonstrated
that.
in certain scenes of the podcast. And when you see Trisha storm off, some would draw that what you're actually witnessing is an episode of BPD and question whether it's actually ethical that we're even witnessing what's going on. Everyone accepted that this time round, these sorts of interactions were a very real possibility, and in an attempt to preserve that raw nature to make sure that we're receiving the full picture, even the ugliest parts are left in. Yet, although that rawness was in itself an appeal for many viewers, it also led some to question whether this was really fair given Trisha's own personality disorders, given that these outbursts were thought to be a symptom of the condition in question. It's a complex discussion because on one hand, you never want to rob an individual of their agency, and let me make it crystal clear, Trisha consented to be on the podcast from its inception to its cessation. However, at the same time, when you're walking around topics that could trigger someone, when you're on a podcast that actively acknowledges that it could become nasty pretty quickly, you also have to make sure you're not just carelessly exploiting that. And although I think anyone would be pressed to say that Ethan ever went out of his way to torment Trisha, also doing nothing about that sort of dysfunctional environment could be seen as passively allowing that toxicity to thrive, which although spectacular points doesn't really do much good for you, Trisha, or anyone else who works on the podcast, and the moment that you stop taking those outbursts seriously, then you risk enabling that behavior as well. This was an emergent problem that was going to cause a very imminent demise if something wasn't done about it. If these were normal podcast episodes, then these disruptions would have likely been the end of Trisha and Ethan's friendship for at least another few months. And at first, it did seem like Trisha was not going to be returning to the podcast. However, given that they had this partnership going, this was something that worked to an extent. I think it gave both parties a greater impetus to try and maintain it. At the same time, doing nothing wasn't the best option either. And in the episode following, the tension between the two was still palpable, with Trisha reluctant to open up to Ethan again after their heated exchange.
I think we're pretty much past it. I think we're past it.
My bad.
Although there was progress throughout the episode, it felt like something more needed to be done to keep this alliance healthy and productive. And by the next show, it seemed like Ethan had found the solution.
Well, I'd stay away from the genetics and back to the brain scans.
You cut that out now, or you'll go home in an ambulance.
Allow me to introduce you to this man then. His name is Drew Pinsky, but is more informally known as Dr. Drew. He is a renowned media personality and internist, which basically means that you specialize in treating a
He's like Dr. Phil. Ugh.
variety of elements of the body without the need for surgery. Some people use the term physician interchangeably with it, in case you're more familiar with that term. Dr. Drew is recognized for a plethora of programs, most notably Loveline, a phone-in show where he would provide relationship, medical, and miscellaneous advice to listeners and callers alike. At its peak, it was incredibly popular, and Dr. Drew was generally perceived as offering pretty decent guidance to those who requested it. Since its discontinuation in 2016, he's continued to make appearances on a variety of broadcasts and has established himself online and on YouTube. On the surface, it seemed like he was a man with fairly solid credentials. So with all this in mind, he was the sort of person who may be able to resolve, or at least ease the conflicts between Trish and Ethan. So, on the 27th of October, he was brought onto Frenemies to help address that rift that had grown between the two hosts. Would he be up to the test?
Well, I feel like we're ending this show on a better note than we've probably done.
I feel great. I was very excited to have you here, Dr. Drew.
On one hand, the discussion appeared to go pretty well. Drew showed an interest in Trisha that allowed them to open up, and they appeared to make progress on perhaps patching up old wounds. There's discourse on drug abuse, and as an expert on that front, Dr. Drew really comes into his elements. In many ways, I can see that this was useful for the two. On the other hand, there is a glaring issue. Dr. Drew is not a therapist, and although he's knowledgeable, he lacks the tact that is typically
Dr. Phil is, hey. Oh, hey, Ninja Anime. Hello there. I just wanted to say I think you're an amazing streamer. So keep up the great work and have a great night. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Right back at you. Man, that means a lot to me. You have no idea. It really means the world.
aspired for by those in that profession.
I feel like we have amazing chemistry, and I see the goodness in you, and I know that you're always fighting to bring that out more than like when you get upset or you do this and that and the stuff you regret. Like, I don't ever see that as who you are. I know who you are, and I love that person as a friend of mine.
Okay, thank you.
I said it was Ethan's idea to bring Dr. Drew on because he seems to take credit for bringing him on at the start of the video. However, if this hadn't been explained, you would be forgiven for thinking that this individual was drafted in by Trisha.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to hurt anyone, even in my relationship now. I am trying to like sabotage it to not make.
I would say, you know, when they brought Dr. Drew, I know Dr. Drew didn't help at all. Like, he's not qualified, you know, to handle this, but I kind of found it interesting that, you know, they were basically, you know, going in all raw, like no script, or at least not how it would be in a reality show. So essentially what you saw in the podcast is what you got, which I found interesting because we don't really see these type of things go on.
make it last because I don't want to be harmful to anybody, and I am. I'm dangerous to myself. I'm dangerous to other people, and it's bad.
Okay,
You know?
so stop. And so Ethan, can you see how when you say something like this is a weaponized, you're attacking me, that's tough territory for her right now. You got it?
Yeah, no,
You understand? Okay.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
so here's the deal.
Now, I don't want to necessarily place all the responsibility onto Plinsky immediately, because I accept that there was the possibility that Ethan briefed the doctor in a specific way that would make him more drawn to sympathy on Trisha's end. However, even some of the comments that he makes seem to be slanted or strangely passive-aggressive.
Oh, damn, Tana's looking.
Okay, stop it. Okay.
Oh my
so
goodness.
I didn't know her. No, I
goodness.
didn't even know her name. And then I did that.
You're one of those people on the internet, my man.
Wait, me?
No, he is.
Oh,
Feeling free to attack people he doesn't know.
Exactly.
Okay, wait, what do you mean one of those people?
One of those people that I'm swatting off every day that doesn't understand that people that are out there on the internet are actually people.
I will preface by saying that I'm not a therapist, but I have experienced therapy, and I'd like to think I know a thing or two about working with people. And one of the things that you should be doing as a therapist is helping someone open up. Immediately antagonizing someone publicly, even in semi-jest, is not going to do that. It's not the only snarky remark he makes, and it really feels out of place for what he's been asked to do. However, my issues don't end there. One of the endless problems with Dr. Drew are these closed statements that fail to explore a person's feelings. I really don't want to go too much on a tangent here, but it's really important that a patient can find closure in their own judgment, even if you've directed them there in a way. The problem is, when you end the discussion of a particular topic prematurely, even if you think you've wrapped it up, the discomfort in that person will linger, whether it's discomfort with your judgment or doubt of their own judgment. It's not a healthy place to leave someone, particularly if you've directly conflicted with their own opinion.
Drew, you could tell me if I need to apologize or not on this one.
She looks like a Twinkie.
All right,
This is what Ethan was promoted as.
Apology warranted? The yellow outfit was the...
In a weird way, that's making too much of nothing, which is, guess what? Photographs lie. And if we don't know that by now, then caveat emptor. You know what I mean? And I don't know that woman. I mean, if you feel like you hurt her feelings, you should apologize. You don't want to hurt her, I'd assume. But
I don't think I hurt her feelings. I think you just...
Yeah, I don't think she cares.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't think it's a big deal.
Yeah.
But there is something to be learned from that, which is that photos lie, videos lie too.
Dr. Drew kind of establishes himself as an authority in providing opinions on topics throughout the episode, and that's not really right. Ethan doesn't handle this the best, admittedly, by thrusting the emphasis on whether he should apologize to Pinsky, but at that point, you as a therapist need to step in and say, hey, it's not my job to arbitrate these specific situations. It's my job to help you arbitrate them yourselves. Nobody needs to know Dr. Drew's opinion on this subject to find resolution. This isn't to say that he can't express feelings about certain matters, and in many places he speaks with power to subjects that are helpful, but he often seems too driven to make a judgment before all the facts are on the table. Case in point?
Okay, there was an issue. This is a whole different issue, but I had an issue with my boyfriend, which is his brother-in-law, with private DMs. He exposed all these private things, so there's no boundaries when it comes to me.
No, I
But
get
as soon
it.
as I bring up something private with him, then what triggered me was he's like, whoa, you're weaponizing. Oh my God, you're being a
Yeah, I never
crazy
weaponized
now.
anything.
No, you told me I was weaponizing when all of a sudden I thought that was our relationship, just saying whatever, just everything's out in the open. So I was like,
That's what I thought. So she's confused. It confuses her to not know where you're supposed to draw the line. Right?
Yeah, I was shocked.
But don't you see why me now would never say anything like that to you in private?
I can see that, but the same thing, you read private text messages I sent only to you.
Hold on. Ethan, not saying things in private to her because of that does not make you an open person. Right? You can't say I'm totally open about everything, but I can't trust you, so I'm not going to be open. It's okay. You don't have to tell everybody everything, but don't claim that you're wide open and telling everybody everything. She's the one that's really wide open. Too much so, right?
I agree. I do agree with that.
Ethan has expressed a direct disagreement with what Trish is recalling. At that point, you have to unravel that. Otherwise, you can't be certain that the image that is being projected is an accurate one. Instead, Dr. Drew takes Trish's word as gospel and moves in with his thoughts, but without addressing the fact that this judgment may be based on presuppositions that aren't exactly true. There's no guaranteed validity, and once again, no guaranteed closure. If there's a sensitive personal subject that had previously been publicly revealed, that's very different to one being exposed for the first time. In a way, Dr. Drew is somewhat disadvantaged in judging these situations. He is unfamiliar with the podcast. He clearly hadn't watched the situation transpire as he is approaching it with fresh eyes. However, when you do that, you also need to know that someone's word may not be completely accurate, and if you assume it to be right, you risk never bridging that divide.
Sweaty Betty, find your power.
That's a pretty tight spot.
Watch this.
Your Buick Park said so. That's so you.
Of course you know.
And I've gotten help for the past year because I had 2 mental hospital stays where I was put on a 5150. So like I go into these like
These states.
yeah, like it's like a blackout where I'm like not that person.
Yes.
And like that was the first time that happened. So now that that's out there on the internet, like everyone thinks that's just me, that I just like abuse people, and it's like it's never been that far.
It's difficult when dealing with Trisha because you don't want to risk triggering an episode, but at the same time you also want to be careful when dealing with someone whose narratives can be somewhat unreliable. You could be providing life-changing advice, but it wouldn't matter if it's under false pretenses. The presentation of this is couples counseling, but by the end it has really transformed into Trisha's counseling, with the occasional input from Klein. And maybe it makes sense given that Trisha has more issues. But when you're trying to repair that bond, there has to be some semblance that you're keeping a couple on even footing. They have to be in this together.
Yeah, I can see why your relationships don't work out.
I can see why you've been with the same person for 12 years.
Thank you.
You have no other options, and Quite frankly, I don't blame you.
Ethan may have had problems in how he interacted with Trisha. He knew that frenemies needed conflict, but it's a fine line to walk, and it's fair to say that at points he may have crossed a few sensitive boundaries. However, it was a shared change that needed to be undertaken, and even with the understanding that Trisha was working on themselves, they still had a commitment to the podcast as well if they wanted to maintain it. Nonetheless, towards the end, we appear to be moving in that direction, as there seem to be heartfelt comments from both co-hosts expressing remorse for previous hostility and expressing desire to build from it.
I feel horrible. I do apologize for being so nasty, like from the pill thing, because I know how that feels, and I apologize for trying to be tough and badass and talking about Hila and everything. I always feel bad. Like, I feel bad about it when it's not in a joking mode. When it wasn't, when you triggered me, I felt bad. When I was like, good luck trying to get your wife pregnant. Like, it was just a mean thing. I don't know what it was, and I'm sorry, and I feel bad. Like, that's not me.
Thank you.
It's not the last time.
I do know
Not the last time you'll do it.
At the end, you may have been given the impression that this was actually a proper reconciliation, with Klein and Pater thanking Dr. Drew, committing to another episode with him in the future, and the podcast ending on a considerably triumphant note. But it all felt a bit hollow to me. Maybe that's with the context of where we are right now, but even then it's very difficult to take anything at face value, because even becoming invested in this progression requires an assurance that we wouldn't end back in this place that caused this episode to occur, and I wouldn't think that everyone was prepared to invest themselves in that, especially given the difficulty of acquiring the truth and how Trisha even presented that in the podcast. It felt like we could end up here again, and lo and behold, we did.
Well,
yeah, Hila was watching and said, why didn't you tell her that she had powder on her lips? I was like, I was staring at it the whole time.
So mean.
On my screen, it just looked like a glint on your lip gloss.
In the beginning, I said you have powder on your lips, but then you didn't get it all off, and the whole episode I was just staring at.
Can we have Hila as a guest on our podcast?
No, she's busy. Don't talk about Hila. We're cutting this part out. She doesn't want to be talked about.
Are you fucking serious?
I'm serious. We have to cut this.
That's fucking crazy. Like, what's even the point? She doesn't want to be talked about?
Because she doesn't like that you're always bringing her up and saying how she doesn't like you and all this shit, because it's not true, and she finds it annoying because she doesn't want people to start thinking that, like, she doesn't actually like you.
Well, she doesn't. Whatever. It's so fake, and that's why H3's not what it was, because you guys are fake as fuck and cut things out.
Okay, you're like on a thing now. So.
I'm not. I just think it's so fake. It's so bullshit. It's like, oh, let's talk about
Hila asked not to be included.
Yeah, this part was like, ooh, man, this is like one of the most uncomfortable things. And like Trisha is acting extra.
And I'm respecting her request.
Then I'm not talking about anything personal anymore.
Okay.
I don't want to talk about Moses. I want to talk about me. Like, it's just whatever. Who cares?
Should we? Well, like,
it's boring. Cut it. I even cut all of it. I literally couldn't care less.
It was approaching Christmas when another fracas occurred, this time over the topic of Hila not wishing to be spoken out on the podcast. Both involved seemed to try and fail to de-escalate the situation at different points, causing discussion to rapidly intensify, culminating in Trisha storming out and making some exceptionally strong comments.
She's really upset because she was saying how Hila doesn't like her.
Hila says, don't talk about me on the podcast. All I said was, you should have a guest. He's like, we can't mention Hila. She doesn't want me to talk about, oh, she's too good for a fucking podcast. Even though we were talked about, they never once insulted me at the beginning of spring. She has a fucking podcast. I brought life to the fucking H3 channel, but oh, Hila's too fucking good to even mention her name. I said nothing bad. I said like, oh, we should have her as a guest or whatever. Like, I didn't even mention Hila. She doesn't want to be talked about. Fuck.
Okay.
I literally don't care. Literally, I don't want to come back because I really fucking hate her. Such a fucking bitch.
She's not.
And you are too, and you're a fucking cuck.
You
have no fucking backbone.
All right, you should leave. We'll talk later. Yeah, you should get out.
I am going, but we're not talking later. Fucking bitch, you too.
It's not about dumping.
Over the next few days, Trisha put out videos elucidating on their feelings. These videos are long-winded and not the clearest. Some of them are very angry, some of them are sad, but they all highlighted one thing: that Trisha was struggling with their identity and often didn't know what portrait they wanted portrayed on the podcast. Yet they didn't feel like they had a choice in many capacities.
I don't like pushing myself for the sake of drama for the show. I don't mind a debate. I don't mind. Obviously, I love Ethan and find Ethan funny. I like our dynamic. You know, it's very similar to when I was friends with David Dobrik. Like, I like the poking. I think it's fun. I think it's entertaining, obviously.
Honestly, this stuff is gonna sell, obviously. You know, drama sells. But essentially, I don't think all creators, you know, that can't handle, you know, being online should be online. I know it might seem cold or harsh, but I guess trying to fix yourself first is more important than, you know, just trying, you know, to exploit yourself as, it might seem like you might be getting, you know, the thrill out of this, but over time, you know, it's just gonna, like, if you don't get it fixed, like, what will it lead up to? Like, we don't know. I just think that, and we start noticing this with a lot of creators, they struggle with, like, a lot of mental issues that I think should be taken more serious. I know a lot of people kind of, like, joke about that as well, but essentially it is serious, and we are allowed to give our criticisms, but we also got to understand, you know, where they're coming from, as well as, you know, I'm learning about all these, like, disorders they have, and learning to understand, but at the same time, they have to be responsible as well, because that's basically how it works.
Obviously, people find it entertaining, and like I like it. I find it somewhat stimulating to have a opponent, if you will. But I do think Ethan pushes me to get this reaction of me walking out. Me walking out is something I don't like.
This seemingly caused a lot of anguish within them, and in many ways it looked like the only solution was to quit, with Trisha even acknowledging it as a viable option. However, after the success of Dr. Drew's first appearance, our expert was once more called in to settle their feud, this time alongside Dr. Mark Young, an expert on entertainment and business. Okay? Well, Dr. Drew was already pre-booked for this appearance, it just coincided with the pair falling out, so I guess it all fell into place. However, this episode was definitely more contentious than the last. There are obviously tonal issues that I've previously discussed, but many of people's problems come down to the core message of the episode. It's 2 hours, and I'm not going to be talking about all of it. Watch it yourself if you dare.
Or she says she's joking when she says stuff like this, but she goes, well, she says of Hila's mom, Moses' mom, he's not very close with her, and she wouldn't be invited to our wedding. Or you guys wouldn't be invited to our wedding. Or you guys aren't close with Moses. She always says stuff like that I feel like is driving a wedge between Moses and his family. There's one more piece that I think is important.
Right,
when Hila asks Moses about it, Moses says, I didn't say that.
Yeah, it's actually not important.
The main question posed is how these two should be dealing with Trisha's outburst. Now, on Trisha's front, this is a difficult question for sure, but this is why you need someone who's actually an expert in this field. Dr. Drew, for all his abilities and qualifications, is not. So the focus often turns to Ethan, where the discourse quickly becomes focused around how he should deal with Trisha. But Dr. Drew's advice on this front also falls short.
You just will.
Yeah.
And Ethan, your job is to not respond to splitting.
Yeah, but she's driving away. But I can't, if she's my wife.
I got to get on your case for this one. You are allowing the wedge to be put into place. She is doing what she does. She is doing her splitting thing, and your job is to go, You know also, Trisha, that one of your things is unregulated aggression, hostility. Once it gets going, it goes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Ethan somehow can't handle that when that happens.
I can handle it.
Well, no, you escalate it as opposed to just containing.
Like, Drew is basically just enabling her to do that. Like, you gotta show her, where the boundaries are. Like, dude is not helping. It just shows his bias and he's not listening to both sides.
And so
you gotta watch the clip.
The whole mantra of merely moving on from inflammatory behavior seems rather disagreeable. Maybe if they were both 10, it would be some wise old parenting adage, but they're not. You are allowed to assert boundaries at this stage of a supposed friendship. It's almost like Drew believes that any other action other than rolling over is innately provocative, and that's just not true. As a matter of fact, you could well be enabling toxic behavior by not at least challenging it. Personality disorders may make you more predisposed to certain behaviors, and it may help understand and explain actions, which is why it's important to approach these situations with sympathy, but it is never an entire explanation, because the moment it becomes that, you're not only painting all those people with personality disorders in a bad light, but you are giving a person a blank check to let it happen again.
So you shouldn't take offense when you don't know what's what. You just can't take offense to stuff when people are just talking. Later, if you're able to substantiate these things.
Yeah, like I said, you should be like empathetic about it, but you tell them, oh look, this is what you did, but this is what we could do, because I don't agree 100%. Something like that. Essentially, understanding them but not enabling them, and a lot of people fail to realize that.
And find out that Moses is not trustworthy or does feel the way that Trisha's telling you, well, then it's something to talk about. But in the meantime, it's just whatever. Don't react.
So in a way, I think the problem comes down to the fact that Dr. Drew has been brought on to save the podcast, and maybe the only viable option in their mind is for Ethan to appease Trisha, but it's not a healthy option long term, and maybe in this scenario, the only way to save the actual substantive friendship is to seek real therapy for each other, and maybe not have every single interaction be a public spectacle.
I think, first of all, I'm willing to admit my mistake. I should have definitely talked to you about this before we started recording. I should have said, hey.
Can I stop you right there? That does not feel like you mean it.
Oh, it doesn't? I do mean it.
Make it really clear that you mean it, because this will come back around to hurt you if she isn't convinced that you mean it.
One of the greatest issues of this generation of Hollywood experts and wannabe therapists is that they are better at being media personalities than they are at dealing with real people who wouldn't typically deal with their issues in the public spotlight. I think it's completely acceptable to provide life advice in a format that allows you to keep the person seeking advice anonymous, or at least not make them the center of the matter at hand. However, when you're applying a very personal type of therapy, you need more than charisma to make sure that what you're saying is actually helpful for those who will inevitably take those words to heart. Especially someone like Trisha. What we were watching wasn't therapy, it was theater, and it was a question whether the people involved were better off for it.
But I feel like with each of these blow-ups, you guys get, I wouldn't say closer together, but it helps you guys manage your relationship better.
Also, this is the bullying build character of 2020. What a ridiculous statement.
Aren't we all tired of Dr. Drew?
Bruce was Gotham.
Wait, what did Ethan's fans say about that?
Tell me what you think about the truth about
Okay, but you're asking me right now. And so
because you're not being honest.
Okay, but do you want me to reply? I will be honest, but I don't want you to be like, you're attacking my parenting. Do you want my honest opinion?
No, because you said, okay, you say, okay, well, your mom should be here then.
I do think I would have my mom watch over a nanny. I don't trust strangers with my personal experience. I don't think your nanny's the worst. I'm just saying my personal experience.
This is not the exact conversation that happened. I don't think it's productive to go over it now.
Well, you just asked me. Did you not just ask me to give you my opinion on this? And that's what I'm saying. Do you really want me to tell you? I will. I have no problem.
We already
with it.
talked about this.
Okay, but you just asked me to give you an opinion again about it.
I heard your opinion. I heard it.
They actually think he's a licensed therapist. Like Dr. Phil and Dr. Drew, they're more like performative. I don't think they're like professional at all. People have like spoken how, you know, actual licensed professionals have spoken against them.
I don't care to share it again. I'm just saying, like, if he wants
because
to reply,
you're like
I will.
like it's very obvious that she was in that moment digging as deep as possible.
I was not digging it. He was pushing
Okay.
it. Okay.
So
Now, a lot of Frenemies audience really resented Trisha immediately after this episode, particularly given that Dr. Drew's advice seems slanted.
Wait, what did I do?
Ticket to Paradise has opened #1 all over the world.
So proud.
I thought I did something. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. I hit something. Oh, the God.
Wanted to maintain it. Nonetheless, towards the end, we appear to be moving in that direction, as there seem to be heartfelt comments from both co-hosts expressing remorse for previous hostility and expressing desire to build from that.
I feel horrible. I do apologize for being so nasty, like from the pill thing, because I know how that feels, and I apologize for trying to be tough and badass and talking about Hila and everything. I always feel bad. Like, I feel bad about it when it's not in a joking mode. When it wasn't, when you triggered me, I felt bad. When I was like, good luck trying to get your wife pregnant. Like, it was just a mean thing. I don't know what it was, and I'm sorry, and I feel bad. Like, that's not me.
Thank you.
It's not the last time.
I do
Not
know
the last time you'll do it.
At the end, you may have been
I'm like, dude, I just watched like watched like an hour. Okay, here we go.
Tell me what you think about the truth about.
Okay, but you're asking me right now, and so
because you're not being honest.
Okay, but do you want me to reply? I will be honest, but I don't want you to be like, you're attacking my parenting. Do you want my honest opinion?
No, because you said, well, okay, you say, okay, well, your mom should be here then.
I do think I would have my mom watch over a nanny. I don't trust strangers with my personal experience. I don't think your nanny's the worst. I'm just saying my personal experience.
This is not the exact conversation that happened. I don't think it's productive to go over it now.
Well, you just asked me. Did you not just ask me to give you my opinion on this? And that's what I'm saying. Do you really want me to tell you? I will. I have no problem.
We already
with it.
talked about this.
Okay, but you just asked me to give you an opinion again about it.
I heard your opinion. I heard it.
I don't care to share it again. I'm just saying, like, if he wants
because
to reply,
you're like
I will.
it's very obvious that she was in that moment digging as deep as possible.
I was not digging it. He was pushing it. Okay.
So
now, a lot of Frenemies audience really resented Trisha immediately after this episode, particularly given that Dr. Drew's advice seems slanted in their favor. But I find it hard to blame them in many ways for the actual advice they received. The buck stops at self-proclaimed experts in this case. And it's not like they're completely in the wrong. Trisha does deserve sympathy, but just not in a way that invalidates how Ethan feels. If Ethan was the therapist type, then maybe he'd be able to handle Trisha in a way that doesn't affect him. But he's clearly bothered by Trisha's behavior because Ethan is not a therapist. In fact, sometimes he can be quite the opposite.
H3's a hypocrite because he said on his podcast. It's like, dude, you're you call yourself a news source. Like, get fucking real. You know what? If you think I'm wrong, if you think that I'm a racist and a hypocrite, if you didn't bother to watch the podcast and you downvoted and you left a mean comment and you call me a hypocrite, fuck off.
So, unsubscribe. Yeah,
don't watch.
Don't watch. Because we'll have a lot less of that shit to deal with in the future.
Keemstar, the pinnacle of logic and sanity on YouTube.
I have a strange relationship with Ethan Klein. I was always a massive fan of his work with H382 Productions, and I don't think my appreciation for his content has ever fully dissipated. But I do think the podcast kind of revealed.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like I said, the squad and I, we were huge fans of the old H3.
To me, that he had a few more layers than those which were displayed on the original channel. And in a way, it's not exactly a massive surprise. He always had the ability to be quite pointed towards people. I mean, that's how he first came into conflict with Trisha. When it's in that environment, you can always write it off as comedy. On the podcast, it didn't always feel like that. It can come across as quite cynical and trenchant.
Yeah, that opened up our eyes, like, oh, this is who he really is. And now, it's just like he has like a identity crisis because he was like more of this like carefree, like more of an edgy tuber, but now he's like this like SJW tuber, which like I said, there's like certain people I do feel that speaking these certain subjects, they actually know what they're talking about, but then there's others like him and his buddy Hassan that basically try to like dunk on everybody. And Hassan, like I said, he said himself that he used to be everything he criticizes, but the thing is, he easily criticizes anybody that doesn't agree with him, and that's the problem. He tries to act high and mighty, and he himself is still learning. We're still learning. I'm still learning all this stuff. Ethan is still learning. Ethan has even said it, he's still learning, and that's like the problem, because this podcast, and a lot of these like streamers, they basically open their eyes who they really are. And I think people just like believe in everything they say. It's pretty hard to it's pretty hard like to take serious and believe everything word for word. But I'm surprised they got their fans that believe everything word for word. That is actually really crazy.
I think sometimes that can provoke people, mostly people who aren't there, but still, if you're doing a podcast with a person who's easily provoked, then maybe you should be more considerate. But at the same time, you also need to retain some sort of sense of self. Otherwise, you're going to be holding yourself back. And I think the challenge posed to Ethan after this episode was one of great magnitude. Yet, although I've made it clear that I think Dr. Drew's advice was subpar, I think Ethan seemed to find his own resolution that worked quite well for a bit.
But anyway, what we have here today is the steamies, as if drinking the piping hot steamy
Oh, I
tea.
thought it was like a steamy dump.
Yeah, that also went through.
Right?
You could think of it either way. It's a steamy dump. It's a steamy tea. What it is the real award show of 2020 that you wish was here, but the streamers are too much cowards to actually cover what matters.
The first episode after Dr. Drew was the Steamies, a self-acclaimed honest spin on the Streamies, an award show where all the fantastic influencers celebrate their successes. However, in the Steamies, these awards were a bit more ironic, with Trisha even being in attendance to pick up their award for the most dramatic creator. What a coincidence.
Overwhelming majority, 47.1%. Trisha Paytas! Wow. You won. Here it is. Most dramatic creator of the year.
Wow.
They love you. They really love you. And we have a very own Frenemies styled rhinestones steamies presented to you. We're gonna have to get this engraved.
That's
For
beautiful.
Trisha Paytas, most dramatic creator of 2020. Congratulations.
Their first video of the new year seemed to follow in a similar direction, and it helped they have the substance to work with.
Wait,
Frenemies
was
is
this
under
like during pandemic year? Dear God. I don't have time for existential crisis. I can't believe this all happened in panoramic year,
That's gonna
actually.
be the title. It's gonna be really good.
Frenemies under attack. Okay, I like that.
It's true, though. It's true. Two of YouTube's most controversial personalities is creating new conversations about mental health. That sounds good, right?
I don't like being a poster child for like mental health. All of a sudden, like BPD and mental. It's just like
I agree. I don't like it either. We're just two friends doing a podcast.
I did watch your H3 live a little bit about someone saying like, I just hate that that's what it's about. Like, how dare he collab with a girl with mental health issues? It's not like I killed somebody and I should be like locked in prison forever.
You see, over the Christmas break, their squabbles and subsequent attempts to patch it up had caught the eye of certain publications and creators who felt that the content published on the Frenemies podcast bordered on exploited. Ethan, as the chief organizer of topics, comes in with the spin that Frenemies is under attack. Maybe a bit hyperbolic, but it provides a springboard for them to reinforce their bond. I think in this case it works, uniting them around a cause. Ethan also goes out of his way to reassure and support Trisha. A lot of people really appreciate this. They use this momentum to transition into a really good segment in it where they just watch old clips of Trisha on TV, something that I absolutely adore. Maybe it's just my love of game shows, but it's really wholesome. The entire episode is actually quite great, and many people commented how refreshing it was that they genuinely seem like friends here. And I began to think, maybe Dr. Drew's advice wasn't the best. Maybe his tone was too blasé for most, but maybe it's what made Trisha the happiest. Maybe it's what made them the most confident going into the podcast, and maybe it provided a sense of resolution on that.
Maybe you need like the villains to actually bring out something good. You never know.
Identity issue that they had expressed conflict over. Therapy isn't a one-size-fits-all method, and if Ethan's main goal was to keep the podcast going and he still seemed to have a good time, then who was I to judge? Maybe I was being too critical.
Yeah, they're like, if you touch her, you'll be escorted off like mid-show. We don't care. I was like, okay. And then I touched her on accident. I was like,
What
oh,
a diva.
no.
You're just Ellen. You're just a TV host. You're not the fucking queen.
I know. I was so nervous.
Wait, I didn't. Okay, this is great. I'm glad we're doing this.
The episodes after this seem to be continuing in this vein. People actually seem to be preferring this style. It still seemed pretty sharp and witty, but what a change.
I know all the Beatles.
Well, I think John Lennon's the only one that said that they're bigger than God.
They all corroborate with that. I don't
To
like.
be honest, they kind of are bigger than God.
I think God is the biggest.
Okay, name one song he's made.
Well, not much on the surface. Ethan didn't seem to become a shell of himself like
didn't God
some would
make
probably
the
worry, and
intro?
Trisha seemed a lot more optimistic going into the new year. However, I do think the award show illustrated one of Ethan and Trisha's greatest combined strength, that although their spontaneity had its own appeal, they were at their best when they were building off and reacting to other material. It's a very simple observation at its core, but all the worst arguments seem to begin when Ethan and Trisha become too fixated on themselves and their own conduct, procedure, and sometimes now the podcast and those close to them in the moment, particularly when one of them took it personally. Sometimes it's a hard discussion to avoid, given Trisha's nature to go off on tangents about their personal life. Nonetheless, I think that Ethan came into 2021 with a refreshed sense of focus. Although they both were still somewhat easily distracted, he would often bring the video back to the core thesis. He didn't allow himself to be pulled away towards subjects that could lead down a problematic path, and I think that was definitely beneficial. But I also think that with the new year and the new drama, there was a new purpose. Things seem to be looking up for once, and whoever was responsible for it should have given themselves a pat on the back. Maybe Dr. Drew was the therapist we didn't want, but the therapist we needed. But were we missing something?
Okay, so with the argument, if it was exploitive, I would say yes and no, because Trisha, she basically has talked about other people, especially that have issues that she knows about. But you know, Ethan has had like the history of exploiting people, regardless of anything they're struggling with, from what I've seen. But I felt this one only worked like the way they, you know, made it out to seem, or tried to like figure out together. I think it was probably like the only way they could express themselves both.
Here's the thing. There were a lot of theories at the time that Trisha and Ethan played up that drama for the camera, which is in a way what they were responding to that episode. Some believe there was a financial incentive to do so. And it's not like that theory holds no water. Those moments did tend to receive more publicity from the podcast and other sources. But they were so successful without that conflict, it wasn't necessary for their collaboration subsistence. And often with the fate of the podcast on the line, it's not a boundary worth pushing. The long-term trade-off was not worth it. If anything, the content at the start of 2021 showed that Frenemies had the ability to be just as successful without hostility. I think this movement towards...
Oh God, people watch Frenemies as it's like a rerun. Isn't that crazy? It's entirely popular that none of us could have ever imagined, but at the same time, we could have seen it coming too, because like I said, drama sells, and at this degree, ooh man, it's gonna be selling like hotcakes.
Towards a more cemented friendship was almost enough in itself, and very satisfying for audience members to watch. Now make no mistake, they were also helped by an influx of drama which covered creators that Trisha and Ethan both had interactions and history with, ranging from Shane to David Dobrik to James Charles, and when pickings were this plentiful, they didn't have to skimp out on topics.
She was upset that I was going to make out with Seth, and so I flipped out.
You being mad about the Seth?
Well, that's not true. I was here.
Mad about the Seth make out thing is crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Is it?
Was that real? Like him saying it's crazy 3 times, or was that edited?
Oh, I said this earlier. So when I was watching this all happen, in real time, what was something that I found crazy is that they're, trying to expose David, trying to like throw dirt on him, look at everything they could say about him. But once Trisha, left Frenemies, she like welcomed David back when he was, when he returned from being canceled or like hiding in the shadows. And that was just, I guess, like a jab at Ethan. It was like kind of like taking revenge, I would say.
No, that's the clip, unedited.
I just find that entirely weird.
And here's the footage. And not only you saying you're not comfortable with it, but David was, look at, people misuse gaslighting all the time. This is gaslighting.
Right.
Because you know something's wrong, and he's trying to convince you that you're crazy.
Right.
However, this didn't mean that they didn't share more personal moments or tackle difficult subjects. In fact, as I've shown, Ethan really went out of his way to support Trisha. They even had an episode where Trisha spoke about many of their struggles growing up, which at the time seemed pretty riveting.
We weren't close. My dad was in California when we lived in Illinois. And my mom, I had issues with my stepdad, so that was my main focus. Well, not my stepdad, one of her boyfriends, and so that was my main focus at home. And then I tried to say stuff, and then I was like, oh, I'm not gonna say anything. My mom worked 4 jobs, so we were by ourselves all the time. Like, she worked the country club, she was a bus driver, she was a substitute teacher. Like, she worked like so much, and so like her boyfriends would be home or whatever. But it was bad. It was, I thought if like my own like principal doesn't believe me, like no one's gonna believe me, So
You're not a pathological liar anymore.
Pathological? What's that?
Or like you said you're a chronic liar.
Oh, like you think I'm lying about this now? No, I'm not lying about it.
I just am asking because I know people are gonna be like, she admits she's a pathological liar, and you can't trust anything she says.
Like when I was younger, but I'm not now. I don't lie. I make a really conscious effort to.
I believe everything you say. I don't think you're a liar.
Many people really felt like Trisha was beginning to change as a person, and in a way, they definitely were. They were being nice to Ethan, tolerating his assertive comments, saying a lot of genuinely sweet things that many viewers found legitimately endearing. However, I'll bring it back to Dr. Drew and the notion of mutual change that I felt was a bit neglected. At the end of the day, Ethan certainly was capable of doing more to accommodate Trisha, and if you would rather cater to Trish than ask more of them to keep the podcast going, then I think that's justified. But there was still one element that I think Trish needed to provide, and that was trust.
I think my trust with like influencers in general, like I really thought they were my friends, and when he kept being like, I'm here for you, I'm your friend, and I was like, you know what I mean? I feel like maybe a lot of that is.
I think there's plenty of other things that cause drama in your life before that, though.
I think that I went to a mental hospital for the first time in my life after David and Jason.
It should be no surprise that with their history and their dispositions, Trisha isn't a very trusting person. And in a way, it's not like I blame them. I think it's very difficult to trust people when you've had that trust abused in the way that Trisha seems to express it. However, Ethan isn't like those other people, and I have my problems with Ethan, make no mistake. But sometimes a weakness can also be a strength, and one of my criticisms is that Ethan can play favorites a little too much. Now, everyone is biased, however, I think Ethan is unreasonably harsh towards some people and far too lenient with others. Particularly in the episodes where they were covering drama, Ethan really used...
We see that more apparent now, but we gotta see this from all point of views.
An aspect of himself to go at many people Trisha had expressed issues with, really asserting his loyalty. But Paige's reaction often showed there was still an inkling of doubt as to Ethan's sincerity. It always just fell short of the heartfelt moment, at which point you began to wonder if there was anything Ethan could do to break through.
I do in the moment because I always think that I'm on the defense with you when you were actually on my side. And
I'm always on your side. Always.
Right.
Right, you don't believe it. That's fine.
Now, Trisha isn't a stranger to making sassy comments, but they always seemed like a way to shift the tone of a conversation and prevent themselves from showing that vulnerability and trust that may allow someone like Klein in. You could tell their wall was built high, and in a normal world, many would say that this is profoundly illogical. Even if you loathe Ethan, all logical routes would point towards his desire to maintain good terms with Trisha, beyond the podcast as well. The personal investment was significant, especially given Trisha was now Moses' fiancé. Hell, they even did a whole couples episode with Ela making an appearance as well.
All right, Ethan and Trisha first.
Now, with peace and love, I will say I think we're both good drivers, Ela. So this isn't like, I know both spouses say, or usually between two couples, it's like one is obviously better. I think you're a really good driver.
All right, just show your answer.
But I said me.
Me.
Everybody said me.
Moses,
everybody said me.
Wow.
That was pretty funny. Ela, you think you're a better driver than me?
I love your whole explanation. Yes, I do.
Interesting.
In many senses, Ethan was bending over backwards to stand up for Trisha. He gave them a platform to speak on certain matters. He believed them. He advocated for them at every opportunity. This caused backlash at points, particularly when he went toe-to-toe with other creators over dramatic matters, particularly when people didn't believe Trisha's testimonies, which, outside of the H3 fanbase, was still a significant online presence. There are numerous episodes where David Dobrik and the Vlog Squad are addressed. Trisha has a lot of history and baggage with them, and much of that is aired to the point where Trisha claimed that lawyers were becoming
involved. It's going to look like I'm obsessed with David. I can't put everyone's story out, because it takes away the credibility from everything I'm saying.
I don't know, though. I disagree. I know you said that, and I totally get it, because it is like a lot of
people are going to, people are not going to take me seriously if I just turn into the David.
You're giving like a platform to people. Like, I'm shocked Seth shared that story because he didn't get as much attention last year when he was trying to talk about this, and Big Nick as well. Like, I'm shocked that they came forward because Big Nick is still on good terms with David, and it's like at least you're giving people like a safe platform where they feel they're backed by a big creator, which is you, because going against David alone, you just like...
It just gets lost in the void.
Ethan was prepared to antagonize himself to certain audiences if it meant backing his partners, with skepticism billing him as opportunistic and only siding with Trisha because of their status and the revenue that it brought. Now, I'll give my own subjective opinion on it in due time, but it was divisive then. But between that divide, Ethan sided with Trisha. Was Trisha completely on Ethan's side? Well...
And also you're fat, so you qualify. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding because of the argument. I'm sorry.
Look who's talking.
I'm fucking mad.
No, you're not, but the haircut doesn't do you any favors.
In episode 29, there's this interesting interaction where Ethan makes a comment directed towards Trisha about their weight. Trisha then retorts by insulting his hair. This then leads into a rather elongated discussion about which one of them is fatter. All in all, it seems like a pretty inconsequential conversation, until around 40 minutes later when Trisha decides to retract their statement and apologize for their previous comments.
I like your haircut, by the way. Can I just say? I like your haircut. I didn't want to
I
was just trying to be mean.
No, I agree. No,
I was fat, so I needed to fire back.
No, I know.
I felt a little like...
No, it's fine. It's fine.
No, but you made me feel a little bad, and so I want to make you feel bad. And that was...
Thank you. But I actually agree that I always look way fatter when I cut my hair.
That's why I wear extensions.
But I don't feel... But it's fine. Thank you for apologizing.
Okay.
At that moment, it seems like quite a nice gesture, but there's a catch.
Don't feel bad. Don't feel bad.
You don't have anything to say to me? You also called me fat, which triggered that.
Well, wait. What's the point of an apology if you were just looking for reciprocation?
I was just looking to see if you had maybe forgot, but that's fine.
Wait, when I called you fat for the...
That's what triggered me to call you fat.
Wait, the TikTok thing, or what I said? I forget what I said.
Both times. You said I was fat twice in this episode.
Now, if you believe that Ethan should have apologized for his comment, then fair enough. But it's a strange situation because those sorts of jokes never seemed off limit prior. As Ethan points out, the expectation that someone else should apologize for something isn't a good motive for an apology. The point is, though, that he didn't apologize, and there's a moment of awkwardness while Trisha processes Ethan's response, and you just have this feeling that something still isn't quite there for them. Ethan was only prepared to compromise on so much, and it was unclear whether Trisha was fully satisfied with that.
What happened? Oh, another ad. Ooh, bro, this beat goes wild. Ooh, bro, y'all ain't gotta go that stupid on the beat. Oh, now you ruined it, bro. I was having fun listening to that beat, even though it was an ad. It was fun.
With acknowledgement to the previous part and everything that I've said in it, the Frenemies episode still seemed headed in the right direction, with an energy that did become more positive. It still seemed viable that Trisha would finally settle in the place that they were, with the people they were with. The absence of those more large-scale conflicts would make many believe we were perhaps approaching calmer waters, and no one could really be blamed for expecting anything else. At the start of episode 37, Trisha seems in rather high spirits. They mentioned that there had been an argument with the client, but both parties expressed reluctance to delve into details, and they seem happy to move on from it. Maybe people noted how exuberant Trisha was during this episode, maybe even a bit too exuberant.
Yeah, so there is some. So anyway, guys, head on over to Trisha or sadboy2005.com.
We did this as our collab. This is our first collab. We have 4 more collabs coming out this year, and then we're going to start our own in-house stuff. I'm so... Tiny Crush is definitely an inspiration. When I always wanted to do like a clothing line, but I never saw anyone do it. And then, not that it's easy, but like seeing you guys do it, I was like, this could be like attainable. You know what I mean? And
Go for it.
I'm like, I feel like, I don't know. Anyways, I'm really excited. I feel like the quality is good. Everything's hand stitched, hand printed, like this is hand dyed. This is hand sprayed on. Yeah. They dyed this. It's
There's some dude in a studio going.
Someone questioned a few of the comments made during this podcast and whether they were completely alright, with some wondering if they were having a manic episode. Regardless, as good as their mood appeared to be, there was one talking point that they did briefly stop on.
They're about equal. Kind of a coin toss for me.
Oh my god. Super. Technically we, because you actually, anyways,
I pay
the logistics.
them,
Well, you get a little extra from Frenemies to pay the crew, so we pay them for Mondays. You did tell me that.
Oh.
So I pay them too from our earnings. So.
Interesting.
I pay you, Dan.
The arrangement between the two split the podcast profits 55% to 45% in Ethan's favor, with 5% going towards production costs. In exchange, Ethan also claims that he organizes the episodes and does the rest of the work. Trisha decides that this isn't really a topic for discussion right now, and although Ethan persists a little longer, the conversation subsides shortly after. It seems like a mostly trifling detour, one of many, but I'll put a pin in it for future reference. The next episode is a mostly entertaining, albeit uneventful vlog, where Trisha continues to impress people with their encyclopedic knowledge of Hollywood.
This used to be a KFC, and it's now a Zanku chicken.
Wow! That is insider info.
Huh, they're actually right. Fair play. Anyhow, I digress. Though once again Trisha does scold Ethan for not coming in costume, it all seems fairly friendly, and I shan't dwell on it. I think we should turn our attention to the next episode.
I'm not pregnant! So exciting! That was a good title too. We're pregnant.
We changed it because
Why?
We didn't know for sure. And then live on the show, Hila finally got the call from the doctor.
In this episode, there is a pretty significant development in the client's personal life, that being that Hila is now pregnant. The podcast reaction seems fairly elated, and Trisha seems equally excited for the both of them, even being surprisingly self-aware about their emotional response to the news.
It's hard work.
I keep making myself think I'm pregnant. I keep thinking I'm sick. I'm like, I'm sick. And then I was like, maybe you're pregnant. I'm like, no, I'm never.
No, it's just the McDonald's that you eat every day.
Yeah, we have McDonald's. Anyways, that's really exciting. If you keep saying I make it about myself, I'm sorry. I keep relating these stories.
Well, if you guys are serious about...
I think a lot of people have retrospectively tried to read into Trisha's response here, but honestly, nothing seems particularly out of the ordinary. Trisha seems pretty hyped about the release of their new music video, which is an homage to My Chemical Romance, and it was Pride Month as well. Hurrah. Maybe everything was turning out just as we had hoped. Two couples, both happy and healthy, making their way in the world and rooting for each other. In spite of all the uncertainty, this may have been the completion of the arc that we had followed, but not all endings are as happy as we'd like them to be. It's difficult when you're watching these videos at that moment to really know exactly what's going on between them, and it was completely understandable that people had the impression that Ethan and Trisha were consolidating their friendship. The topics yielded a lot of unifying moments, and they seem closer than ever in many ways. The instance that I picked out in the previous part didn't happen on a rather regular basis, but they still underlined that failure to take the final step to put that trust in Ethan's hand. There was still that doubt as to whether Ethan could give Trisha what they wanted, but what did Trisha want?
Like, everybody wants to, like, be me or be in me, always.
And you don't trust me when I say I have no desire to fuck you or be
Yeah, I know you're lying.
One point that I've covered a while back was one of Trisha's first appearances on the podcast. They've always had a slightly strange dynamic with Ethan, often switching between an I hate you stick and an off-puttingly flirtatious vibe that wasn't always met with approval by those who interacted with it.
Fine.
Okay, let's talk about...
Our collab?
Bro, I wouldn't do that for $1 billion fucking dollars.
Like a showering video? You wouldn't just...
So it was like last year when it ended.
Shower with me, like take a shower, nothing sexual.
Not even for $10 million.
Could you imagine if we just stood next to each other naked in the shower, just like doing a shower, like
why do you think anyone would pay for that?
They would. And we
Why?
can split it. We can split the money. You love money. We talk about this. You are driven by money.
I don't love money that much.
Now, I'm not here to say that I think Trisha ever held strong feelings for Ethan, although some people hypothesized it. I think that often quirky behavior in that domain could be put down to past interactions. At the same time, I think there was definitely an expectation that at that point of the podcast, they would be the priority. I don't mean this in a romantic sense, but I think as they became more and more familiar with each other, Trisha seemed to develop a belief that they would have more influence on the general identity of the podcast itself, and they would be able to direct it rather than being this guest for hire. Trisha is an extremely distrusting person, and wherever there was something that seemed to bother them, some discrepancy in their mind, they would use it to fuel their own doubts and to cut themselves loose from the person that they believed to be the source of that. I think Trisha, like many people, almost became enslaved by their own expectation. That expectation for the podcast to crash and burn. Every now and then they'd make these comments that invited Ethan to rise to the insults, or escalate them even, in a way that would provide them with some justification of completely severing that tie, freeing them from the obligation. It was a technique that often died down and was even sometimes resolved shortly after. But if the mood was right, or wrong even, it was the sort of thing that could spiral. And in episode 39, it did.
All right, so anyway, I mentioned the name of the person we're finally ready to talk about, Gabby Hanna, today.
Talking about Gabby Hanna, what could possibly go wrong? Unlike other episodes with Instance, what we were about to witness wasn't immediately apparent judging by the thumbnail and title. This may be due to the fact that Ethan didn't want to make it seem like he was cashing in on the conflict, or perhaps because Ethan didn't view it as second to the much more prominent conversation relating to the titular subject, Gabby Hanna, a person who may have helped bring Trisha and Ethan together in the first place. Episode 39 starts like many episodes do. Unexceptionally, Trisha doesn't seem to be quite as energized as previous episodes, but it's not out of the realms of normality. Ethan is ominously dressed in an unconfessed costume again. However, barely a few minutes in, and Trisha is already dissatisfied at the affairs relating to their costumes, seemingly frustrated by the lack of control they have over its selection.
You got it off Reddit, and you're like, we're gonna do this, and I'm like, I don't like. This is definitely not my idea.
You told me you didn't like it?
My idea would be Maui and Moana. My idea would be Sharpay and Ryan from High School Musical. I've never once picked our costumes. Never once.
What?
Never once. You can fact check anything. Never once.
You have never once picked our
Never
outfit?
once.
Okay, show this.
I don't want to be the girl in the movies. I want to be the boy too. Like, I want to be able to be like.
This goes on for a couple minutes before they reach some sort of resolution where Ethan commits to doing more Trisha's costume suggestions, and the next half an hour passes without major incident, though Trisha does make a few comments towards Ethan about the procedure of the podcast.
So.
Congrats.
Thanks.
Okay, let's talk about Teddy Fresh for 2 hours. I'm just kidding.
We talk about it for about 2 hours every time you mention it. It's like every
just
episode.
kidding. Congratulations.
Have one comment in particular that should have set up some red flags was this one.
Actually, I'm really hateful today, so I need to like rein in the positivity because I have a lot of hate in my heart right now. And I need to like let
for
it go.
Gabby?
I think just in general, I've been feeling really negative. Like when those people were around my car, I just was feeling negative. I felt negative.
I got you. You're like,
you know?
no, give me some space, you little fucking pieces of shit.
Here, Trisha is setting a marker. They're not in a good mood. They have a lot of hate in their hearts. And to that point, Ethan tries to ease any tension by jovially reassuring Trisha, though they don't seem particularly heartened by his attempts. There's a skit shortly after which seems to cut through any agitation in the moment, but the topic of Gabby Hanna, someone who Trisha has stated they do not really like to discuss typically given they believe Gabby is stalking them, is a bold choice. It certainly seems to play into their sense of paranoia.
Because when you feed like stalker people or people, I should say, like this kind of like attention, that's what they live for. Like this girl so wants to be connected to me, and now it's giving her. She's going to be the Yolanda to my Selena. I feel it one day. It's not going to be a good thing.
How the conversation manages to tangentially end up at the ever popular topic of pizza, and they bond over that. It seems the mood has been restored, and all is well once more. But then we cut to the ad segment, and we notice an empty chair alongside our festery friend. He explains the situation, and he doesn't seem too distraught about it, describing the incident as a little blowout, and proceeding with the routine ad reads. However, regardless of the scale of this clash, it was obviously a departure from the conflict-free record, and many were left anticipating the inevitable, and what what exactly would spawn it. While the topic of Gabby Hanna continues, and while they both seem to have some sort of rational grasp on the topic, they do venture through some subjects that Trisha clearly finds triggering, particularly regarding an interview which they felt wasn't completely in good faith. Trisha seems to take this quite seriously, but also quite soberly, and Ethan provides his standard support, though they do seem to dwell on points that may be considered a little morbid for someone of Trisha's paranoid disposition. Perhaps not the best choice.
We can't, after this no Steamy nomination for her either, we cannot mention her ever
Most
again.
likely to assassinate Trisha Paytas.
Stop!
The winner is, and then we invite her up and we give her a knife as a reward.
Stop. That's why I bring security. I have security guards that come with me everywhere. I'm not kidding. She will show up.
Yeah. Most likely to kill Trisha with this knife.
So scary.
With all that said, there is the idea that Trisha being able to vent may have been able to lift that weight off their shoulders, and they seem to express this sentiment of greater stability as well, since cutting certain toxic people out of their life.
Even my aura, my stability in my mind, like the fact that I can handle triggers and like
good auras.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah, and I've gone to therapy. I've been going to therapy since 2019, so you could say therapy, but at the same time, I'm like, I really think since like I really left that, like everything's been like so much better. Just
very
like
interesting.
Yeah, everything, like health, like money, like everything just like flows, friendship.
But then, not too soon after the pizzas arrived, there were signs of discontent.
No, I got black olives, pineapple, and jalapeno, and it's insane. So good.
Wait, no, not my discontent. Trisha's discontent, though. We are going to have word about those pineapples, Ethan. No, the real problem arises when Trisha begins to talk about Brokeback Mountain, a romantic drama about two cowboys who become romantically intertwined in a rather unaccepting environment. Trisha was clearly very invested in the plotline, and also the narrative that was still relevant to this day in their mind. Ethan, however, becomes a little distracted by the pizza, and the awkwardness radiates through the screen.
There's still people are still like that. Like trans people are getting beat in their face to death.
I'm
like
so over that shit.
And so like watching it, I was just like, holy shit. And like Heath Ledger, Jake Gyllenhaal said Heath Ledger refused to make like gay jokes about it, like during the Oscars, and I don't know.
Is there a third pizza?
You're so not good about this. Okay, let's go to your stupid. I don't like this segment. Just for the record, fan advice is a stupid segment.
It's a little rude on Ethan's part given the subject, but it's nothing that needs to escalate. However, Trisha, clearly feeling wronged, decides to go in.
I never pick the costumes. I never do the vlogs. I give so many ideas. I say dancing for the vlog. I give all these ideas, and you don't. It's just
what's wrong with advice
for you? I don't think it's a good segment.
The people want to hear from us.
Okay, do it. I'm telling you my opinion. And all the vlogs we've done, I've adjusted other vlogs, and like that never does.
Well, if you don't like it, then we shouldn't do it.
Okay.
Since it's a show about me and you.
No, but you're saying I do all the work, but I'm telling you I don't like all the stuff you do. I'm just kind of go with it because I'm like, okay, I guess this is what you want to do, but I have to start saying no because some things are just not good ideas.
Although this feels like a rather dramatic change in tone, you can tell that these are frustrations that have been boiling up, particularly given their prior mentions. Although Ethan feels like he does the heavy lifting, Trisha clearly doesn't feel like they've been given the chance to, and is quite blunt about it. They also don't think the material for the podcast is original enough.
But you're asking like, we do all the work. It's like we spent one Frenemies rehashing all the stuff you said about Keemstar on H3 Live, which was 2 days prior.
Okay, it happened
like,
one time.
No, it's happened before where you just like bring up stuff that you already mentioned, and it's fine. But
why are you attacking me?
You asked me. You said tell me, and I'm telling you. Like all your just because you guys come up with everything doesn't mean it's good. It's recycled a lot of it. So it's like I can come up with new ideas. A lot of it.
No. If you have ideas, I'm all ears.
I watch H3 Live and we talk about the same thing, and I'm happy to talk about it.
It's not always like that. It's happened before. I agree.
It happened last time. It's happened a lot.
Sometimes I forget what I've talked about. Honestly.
But you're saying you have all this crew that does all this work for you, and nobody could remember that you talked about that 2 days prior.
I agree. Somebody should have said something. I was like, guys, why don't you tell me when I'm talking about the same shit over and over? Because I tell them, I go, yo, make sure to include this, and they go, oh, okay. But I go, oh shit, I talked about the same thing.
Ethan defends himself on this front, though conceding on one point, while asking Trisha to be a bit more honest with their emotions, something which then prolongs this tension, eventually leading into the dreaded discussion surrounding revenue split, which once again comes back to the notion of control.
But I feel like you're so angry about this.
I'm literally not, but it's so funny. I'm not. I'm angry when you say that.
You need to admit when you're angry.
Ethan, I promise you, this is really is gaslighting. I go to a lot of therapy right now. This really is. When I say I'm not angry, I'm not. I'm like just trying to tell you that you're like, oh, we do everything for the show, and I'm saying it's not always good. I'm not angry. If I was angry, I would like leave or something, but I'm not. But you tell me I'm angry
or something. You're not upset.
Okay.
People we hire. Why would I ask you about people I hire?
Because it's Frenemies and you take the budget for paying the crew. That's what you told me. You take highlights, you take 5% to pay the crew.
No,
so why don't I get any input on the crew or what we do?
These are employees of our.
So why are you taking highlights and 5% of Frenemies? You told me that it was to pay them. That they could be working
for production costs.
Okay, but you told me
at the
beginning.
Costs.
You told me at the beginning it's like they could be working on other things. So I made that argument too. I'm like, well, they're already H3. Oh, they could be working on other things. So I'm like, okay, in that case.
For production costs, I take 5% extra from the
5%. There we go. And I take the 5%.
And everything else we split.
Right. So for production costs.
Yeah. And so we had to buy.
But that was the first time we ever spent money on production costs.
It's not about that, dude. It's literally about we are producing the show and I'm taking a cut. I feel like that's beyond reasonable.
All the
beyond
highlights.
reasonable.
5%. 5%. Do you realize how much 5% was of our last one? That should be enough. But also like highlights, and then you weren't the membership had to fight for because you weren't. I have to tell you about the members. Like
I giving you 50% of all the members.
Trisha seems rather irritated despite proclaiming that they're not. And when Ethan expresses this, it only seems to worsen their mood, with Trisha believing they're being gaslit. This then causes them to express doubt regarding Ethan's intentions, and then Ethan, once again giving up, concedes that he must have gaslit her.
I'm just because you could be upset and still show up.
I'm not upset, and that's what gaslighting is because you're saying I'm gaslighting you by saying
you're not upset. You're perfectly.
Oh, wow.
You're in a perfect.
Gaslighting.
But this was a great mistake.
Wow. Holy cow, that's crazy.
Trisha,
I mean, I don't know how
one.
you just don't see what you just did. That's really.
What did I do?
I think we have to end it now. Like really.
What did I do?
We gotta stop for real. Really. We
Okay.
stop. Please.
Oh my god. Trisha.
Trisha, let me just.
I got a question. So, is it our fault that we allowed Trisha to get this far? I think it's our fault, and we just don't want to admit it. But oh my god, we basically give her like the attention, and she just ran with it.
Say,
the fact, Ethan, that you just did that, you're right. You're right. Nothing's wrong with you. But I go. You know how much therapy I go to a week? I go to 4 Zoom sessions a week.
No, I understand.
Ethan, what you just said was, you're right, Trisha. Everything's fine. That's insane. Like, the fact that you did that to me is like.
This is one of the problems with the rollover strategy. Sometimes it's completely the wrong thing to do. In this case, Trisha is expressing a doubt, a product of paranoid thinking. There is no doubt in my mind that Ethan was not trying to gaslight them. He just wanted clarity on how they are feeling. But Trisha continued to push that theory, and in the hopes that admitting it would make it die down, Ethan does just that. The problem is that Trisha doesn't want that. They didn't want to be right in that case because what they were expressing is something that represents their worst fears, that Ethan is just taking advantage of them and reaping the rewards, and psychologically deceiving them whenever they bring it up. In this case, their thoughts were that by framing their behavior as angry or frustrated, Ethan was trying to use their emotional response to discredit their legitimate criticism. Although in a difficult spot, Ethan should have stood his ground, explained his perception, and tried to calm the situation through a rational de-escalation. But he did seem tired, and his concession, despite perhaps being a mistake, may have been a reflection of his own mental exhaustion of trying to upkeep a podcast that was taking its toll. With that said, given his sponsor segment, he clearly expected this to be resolved by the next episode. After all, we had seen Trisha evolve a lot as a person in their time on the podcast. Alas, this appeared to actually be the podcast final episode, as the following morning, Trisha announced that they were stepping down from Frenemies indefinitely.
I get it, like, and I get now he's saying that H3 produces and he deserves that as a producer, but it's like I would have loved the opportunity to pitch in half for the set to, you know, because I really do feel like I built this show, like, with them, like, at 50-50. Like, I don't think I'm the main reason because God knows my channel and my podcast doesn't do, like, what Frenemies does, you know what I mean? But at the same time, like, H3, I have, like, it wasn't doing what it's doing now either. I feel like I helped build that. Like, I thought Frenemies, we were building together, like, from the beginning was, like, 5% goes to help the crew, and then the other goes to production costs. So I thought we were, like, building something, like, it was gonna be, like, a bigger, like, set, bigger things, bigger vlogs, but it's just like, but if I knew I was coming in as a third H3 show, like, I swear, hand to God, would not have done it. And then yesterday, just, you know, hearing that, like, you know, he's the producer and he does everything when I really tried hard to contribute, and I really tried hard to, like, bring my own stuff every week, and I feel like I did. I feel like I had topics and stuff, and it's just, like, it hurt me.
As a video, it is extremely incoherent, but it's not hostile. Trisha expressed great regret over the decision they're taking and vents many of the frustrations that seem to be creeping up on them in the final podcast episodes. They felt their Frenemies had become such an independent force of content that they deserved a balanced input, something they didn't have. They in hindsight admit that they were frustrated, but didn't feel like they were in that moment, and obviously didn't respond well to Ethan's comments. They've also felt generally uncomfortable with the crew, and certain incidents have certainly underlined that. With the knowledge that this feeling is mutual, they don't want to return to that environment with anyone walking on eggshells. Although they stand by their gripes, they're clearly upset with how they handled it, and they wish it hadn't ended like that, and they hope they can remain firm friends with Ethan and Hila.
No longer serving me, and I will say for the record, like, Ethan and Hila have been, like, so freaking kind to me, like, and I hope it doesn't affect our, like, personal relationship, because, like, obviously, like, they are, like, family, like, I really love it, but, you know, at the same time, I always say, like, don't work with family, don't work with people you're close with, and, like, I kind of, like, feel that, you know, right? Like,
as a video, I can understand why some may have issues with its presentation and maybe its message too, but I honestly think that maybe stepping down was the best thing to do here. And Ethan seemed to reluctantly yet gracefully accept their resignation, putting out a couple tweets on the matter which expressed disappointment yet acceptance, stating that he had done all he could. In a way, it was a bittersweet moment. With this in mind, we could finally bring the Frenemies saga to a close. A nice, peaceful close where everyone remains friends and we can all move forward together. This crazy yet flawed experiment was finally over. May it rest in peace.
Wow.
Yeah, right. There ain't no rest for the wicked, though, and as quickly as it seemed the drama came to a peaceful conclusion, it reignited once again. Ethan was clearly unhappy that Trisha announced publicly they were stepping back from the podcast before speaking to him, which I can understand, and he reached out expressing his own frustrations. Trisha responded to this by posting another video called One More Thing, not the title of their new Sad Boy song, admittedly.
The H3 employees have nothing to do with Frenemies as far as our 5% salary. The 5% thing. Yes, Ethan gets an extra 5% from the main channel, but he also gets 100% of the highlights. So technically, 105%. And the highlights make a shit ton of money. I add up the views of our Frenemies highlights, not about H3 highlights, of our Frenemies highlights, and that's like, it's literally probably half of what we make. It's a lot. I would guess anywhere from $50,000 to like $80,000 like a month. Like, that's just a guess. I don't know. I don't see the numbers. I never do. And I'm not asking for the crew to be fired. The crew have been so great to me. I'm asking, and Ethan and I came to terms with last night to, like, have a producer. Like, even if they had a new hire, like, I would love my sister. If everyone's, you know, there's a couple couples, you know, working on a show or whatever, or people related to each other, the 5% and talking about their salary, and the crew only gets 5%. Like, I have no idea what the crew gets paid. I lashed out that I didn't like the ideas, and I lashed out on Ethan because Ethan is the one that presents me the ideas. I don't know how it works with them. I don't know who comes up with it. I don't know how they brainstorm. I don't know any of that because I'm not included in any of that.
The video is meant to be a clarification on the money matter, though once again, Trisha goes off on various tangents, and it seems mostly unexceptional as Trisha videos go. Certainly a departure from the angry Trisha that we had seen before. Ethan, however, feeling that Trisha's responses were quite unsporting, tweeted his frustration, claiming that the video was causing undue hate towards the crew. Now, as a video, it's more defensive than aggressive, and I would be surprised if it changed that much. But once again, that was their experience. Trisha, however, obviously felt hard done by because they believed that Ethan was using the crew as a shield to try and attack their voice. I can understand why this may have bothered them in the moment, but the best thing they could do in that case was to make sure they didn't prove Ethan's point. We all know that when Trisha feels Ethan isn't being just, it will spiral. And from here, there were a series of tweets by both parties, mostly Trisha, arguing their case. Maybe we're urging Trisha in particular to take a step back, especially after DMs began to be published, which actually ended backfiring when people pointed out Trisha's curious use of certain terms. In this case, both sides seem to relent momentarily, with H3 stating that he needs to take a step back on the night and expressing regret over his tweets, and Trisha doing the same the following morning. Many wanted them to hash this out in private, and with both sides seeming to walk back their conduct a little, it was thought that maybe this would be the opportunity. The problem is that I think Trisha did legitimately feel like they were being treated poorly, and when they're trapped in an environment with someone who they feel is acting without the best intentions, they don't want to confine themselves to that space. Yet, instead of consulting a friend or a reliable third party, they decide to make the internet their trusted confidant. A generally bad decision, not just for yourself, but for the other person who feels that you're betraying their trust by taking it to such a public platform. Social media for Trisha was event space, and not one that was very healthy.
Good morning, guys. It's early again. I, of course, didn't sleep last night, and I just wanted to, like, this thing has gotten so blown out of proportion. Like,
yeah, like, generally all the stuff that she does, like I said, you would do privately. Speak to a mentor, a therapist, anybody you could trust, really. I know not many people have that stuff, but just trying to find ways to vent without, going to the internet, because the internet, you're gonna get like 1,000 different answers. So I don't know why she decided to go here. Was it for the clout? So in a way, she was kind of exploiting herself, if you think about it.
I think I'm just in shock all this happened because it just spiraled from one thing and then it became another and another.
The following morning, though, Trisha posted a video titled "I'm Sorry," where they channel those regretful sentiments. They apologize a lot and believe it was a misunderstanding, and insist they don't want to be viewed as that hateful monster that they may have appeared as the day before. This is something that they genuinely felt bad about. With both sides back to a more sympathetic stance after a brief moment where emotions overflowed, it seemed that maybe both parties could find closure on this matter. This was the conclusion that we needed. However, it was not the conclusion that we deserved. Why did we forsake God?
Hello, everybody. Not a typical episode, obviously.
They do the incredible. Help save lives. So can you. Your CSL plasma donation can help create 24 life-saving medicines. Be rewarded for your generosity. Help save so many lives. Donate at CSL Plasma today.
On October 21st.
It's not one of those amicable divorces. I try not to be in the same time zone.
The battle is on.
You don't win anything for finishing the whole pig. Promise, no passive aggression. What about aggressive aggression? Sit still, what a baby.
Ticket to Paradise. Rated PG-13.
Now, for many, episode 39 is technically regarded as the last episode of Frenemies. However, there is one more video in the Frenemies playlist, a video uploaded on the 10th of June 2021, 2 days after Trisha officially quit, by Ethan addressing much of the drama that had been occurring. He comes into this video with the intent of correcting the record, given that Trisha had been making a variety of public statements. Ethan seemed to be approaching this with the signature peace and love, and not wishing to burn any bridges.
So I say with peace and love that, as a friend, I have come to love and appreciate Trisha. As a partner, I think she's one of the funniest people I've ever known, one of the most talented people, one of the most dynamic and entertaining people I've ever known. She puts me in these tough situations where it's like, I'm losing no matter what. She can say whatever she wants, what she puts out publicly. And then, if I just sit and take it, everything's distorted. And if I say anything, then I'm the bad guy for, coming after or something, which is not my intention at all. This, just for the record, is not.
The video seems to seek to clarify certain points that were made, first being the employment one. Ethan states that they actually discussed this after the argument on episode 39, and Ethan had agreed to let Trisha bring on a producer to try and ease Trisha's discomfort with the current arrangements.
So the day after we shot, after we had broken up, we had a conversation for the first time ever about her wanting to hire new staff that she would look for and hire to work on Frenemies. That was the first time we had ever discussed that. And after talking it out with her, I agreed. I said, okay, we can, again, because I just want to make everything smooth and manageable. We had this big blowout. We talked the evening afterwards. I said, let's hire a producer. You tell me who you want to hire, and I'll hire him.
His only stipulation was that the situation would be left to settle for a few days. However, the following day, he was blindsided by Trisha's video, which in his opinion undermined the agreements previously made, and framed the situation uncharitably, especially given what Trisha had asked for initially was rather unreasonable and disrespectful in his mind.
I don't know. From a business partner perspective and a friend perspective, that video really rubbed me the wrong way, because I woke up after having a conversation with her where I agreed to everything she wanted to do, and I wake up to her being saying all this stuff about private conversations we had, and saying, oh, it's the crew's fault. It's the people on the crew were unhappy, and I don't know. I just felt like that video was just so unnecessary, and I just didn't get it because I had done everything possible.
He also clears up some misconceptions as to why the crew were reluctant to shoot the day after, citing that it wasn't due to Trisha's behavior on set, but actually him feeding comments back to them about Trisha's requests, which he concedes was his fault, or with him taking the final decision to not shoot despite the crew's openness to do so.
She told me that she wanted a whole new crew for Frenemies because she didn't feel comfortable with them. She wanted a whole new space. She wanted a whole new crew. And it just, I don't know. It's like she couldn't meet me halfway. Whole new crew. We need to essentially fire everybody that's worked on the show from the beginning, find a new space, and change everything. This is where maybe I fucked up, okay? Is that I was talking to the crew like, Trisha wants to, I was like, listen, Trisha wants to hire a new crew. When the crew found out she wanted to fire them all, they were there. First of all, they've always been down to go work and do the shoot as scheduled. They are good, loyal, hardworking employees that are down to get the job done no matter what. I had done a temperature check, like, how do you guys feel about going to do this? Because there was just people like, the vibe was like, Trisha wants to fire you guys and hire new people to do Frenemies. And also, do you want to go meet with her and shoot tomorrow? And so obviously they were like, well, it's a little awkward, right? But of course I'm willing to do it. So I made the executive decision as their boss trying to foster a healthy work environment, that let's just not do the shoot tomorrow, bearing everything that's happened, and take a few days to chill off.
He states that Trisha's comments about certain things alongside DMs that were leaked had caused people to go.
What?
Out of their way to harass individuals who had not done anything wrong. He expresses solidarity for the people he works with and reaffirms the stance that Trisha's behavior was unprofessional in his eyes.
I don't think it really matters whose idea it was. The fact that Trisha was just going to sit there and trash their work was kind of unacceptable to me, because ultimately I have to create a safe work environment for my employees, and it's just kind of toxic to sit there and shit on their work, whoever did it. It doesn't matter who did it. But the thing is, she keeps harping that in all of her videos, to the point where not only is Sam now getting shit on her like social medias, people have gone out of their way and been like, you're the reason Frenemies is over. People are going to like AB's wife, people are going to Dan's girlfriend, and just like random spit firing shit at them with the chance that that's the person Trisha was talking about. And it's just not acceptable, you know. And this was part of a private conversation that she made public to try to justify why she wanted to leave the show. The crew did nothing wrong. I misunderstood the situation. I told Trisha that people were upset that she didn't like the segment, okay? I take the blame for that. The reason they were upset that I misunderstood is because she said she wanted to fire them all. They were always willing to do their job, period. They have done nothing wrong.
This is all fairly anecdotal, with his own perspective thrown in there. However, the tone changes to the next part, where he seems to address the inherent problem with how frenemies have become. This idea that Ethan had become a, quote, emotional punching bag. And while he often had to show restraint in those moments, Trisha had free reign, a double standard in his mind that he lost patience for, venting many of his own frustrations surrounding Trisha's behavior, including claims about their contributions, their conduct while they were creating content, and their nature to publicize drama.
She called my wife, like, the C word. She called me, you know, she said the most horrible thing. She said, I'm a terrible parent. Hila's a terrible parent. And for me, it's like, okay. And I understand, again, that she has mental health issues, but at the end of the day, it's just not, I don't feel like it's fair, even though.
Damn. You know, it's bad that, you know, I got to side with Ethan slightly on some points.
She has those issues. It's just, I can't be her emotional punching bag. And then the minute I speak up for myself, it turns into another like show ending fight. It's just not a fair relationship. I texted her trying to be mature and handle it personally, like off the internet. I said, you know, I just want to be honest with you and say I felt it was really unfair how you put that video out, you know, after we worked to try to resolve this. And she ignores my text, and she posts another 20-minute video 30 minutes later that was in response to my text that was more like, oh, the crew's the reason why this happened, and sending even more hate to their fucking Instagrams. I'm a patient man, but I'm not like superhuman.
Another problem he communicates is Trisha's nature to not actually confront their problems. Now, we've known this for a while, but in this case, he shows that Trisha did not indicate there were any problems with ideas that they had subsequently trashed on the podcast and after the podcast, including that of the costume and the segment.
And it's like, imagine how confusing it is, because she goes on the show and she says, oh, this questions is so dumb. It's lazy. It's crap. I hate it. I mean, the day before, she retweeted it unprompted. I did not even ask her. That's just really, really difficult. Like how much she hated the costumes. It was my idea. She never wanted to do it. She doesn't even know the character. She says, I don't even know this character. I sent her this picture. I said, costume idea? She says, laugh my ass off. Oh my God. This is one of my all-time favorite movies. Can we? I love her. I don't understand. What am I supposed to do? That's what I mean. It's like, I can't humanly do more. She expects superhuman care.
He then continues to explain his justification between the 5% gap between shares and the profit from the podcast, something that he clearly feels he's been quite generous and transparent about. He addresses the DMs that Trisha shared, the investment he made on merchandise, with an escalating tone of exasperation, conveying the frustration at the investment he lost.
We pay for the set. We rent the space, we film it, we use our equipment, we employ the people, we edit it, we upload it, we post it, we get that sponsors, we develop the concepts, we work all week to prep the segments, we pay for the insurance, we do the accounting and the payroll. I send her a fully itemized report every month of literally everything and how the expenses break down and her cut. And the fact that she would even accuse me of not being transparent is honestly very hurtful, because I've gone so far out of my way to be as transparent as possible. I show her literally everything. And then she starts going, I want an itemized breakdown of how that 5% is spent. And I'm like, dude, it's not like that. It's a fee. It's a production fee. I'm not giving you itemized deduction of the entire business. That's just, it's like these absolutely unreasonable, unimaginable bars that I can never reach. She posted a screenshot of herself calling me Jewy for wanting 5% to cover the massiveness of this production. We spent $30,000 buying all new equipment, cameras, switching board, audio equipment, microphones, everything, so that we can continue to do it at the house for her. And she keeps bringing up this like, well, you get 5%, so you like, what is that for? You need to be paying. And I said, okay, you know what? Let's keep the show going. Let's do it at the house. I'm going to spend another $30,000 on the already $50,000 I spent on the set. Circles, we are splitting the 30%, which is typically our profit margin. It's like, Trisha, just read what I wrote to you. The profit margin is 30%. I'm giving you half of the profits. Do you want 50% of all the revenue? Because I will lose money again. Apparently, you're the only one that's allowed to make money in this relationship. I really don't understand.
Although he came into the video with peace and love, it kind of felt that mood waned after the first 20 minutes. If everything he's saying is true, then it's not hard to understand why he feels the way he does. But given what we know, it was not going to temper the situation.
Every penny I've made from Frenemies, by the way, if she wants to talk about money, is tied up in this merch that doesn't come out for another month. I don't even know if we're going to sell. So it's like, for all the complaining she does for money, she's the only one, as far as I'm concerned, that's actually making money from this thing. Because I've spent pretty much every fucking penny I've made from Frenemies into the show, on merch, into the own resources, buying more equipment for the fucking studio, building the set. It's like, it's so easy for her to complain. She shows up, she gets a guaranteed check every fucking month. And I'm putting all my money on the line. And now I have hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up in merch that I'm probably not going to be able to fucking sell, that my wife worked super hard on, her staff worked super hard on, and now it's like, tough luck, dude. Trisha got paid, and she's complaining about 5%. It blows my mind, and I'm upset about it. I am. I can't hide it. I just am. It's just not fair. 5% when I'm literally not making a fucking penny at this point. It's just so disrespectful. It disregards all the hard work we do, not only on the crew, but now on my wife and all the people that worked on the merch. And it's like, okay, well, you know, fuck you.
In a way, his own confusion may appear contradictory because on the one hand, he expresses the fact that he did not want to overhaul the structure of the show to cater to Trisha's needs with the possibility that they could quit any minute. At the same time, he's still frustrated that he has lost all these investments, particularly on the merchandise front. I think it fundamentally comes down to trust. Although Ethan's vexation is to be expected, it was clear that he had still expected this to happen inevitably. He was the producer and the owner. And when you're in that position, you have to be prepared for someone to walk out on a project. And Ethan certainly expected as much. With this in mind, ending the podcast was probably for the best. And although visibly frustrated, he shows resolve in his final decision.
I mean, we've gone out of our way in every imaginable way to make her feel welcome, accommodated, listened to, appreciated to. And the truth is that I'm very grateful for the experience we've had with Frenemies and all the learning and growing and developing and the amazing growth that our channel's seen as the result of that show. I mean, it's been popular and successful beyond what either of us anticipated. And I have so much to thank Trisha for. It is with a heavy heart, you know, that we end the show, and it sucks. It does suck, but you know what? Life goes on, right? We're not stopping. We're only getting started. And I'm sure that Trisha's got a lot of good stuff up her sleeve for you guys as well. So,
however, Ethan's video did not sit well with Trisha. And maybe they felt offended by his expectations, maybe they didn't like the framing, but as always, they responded. And what we received was a lot of content, but not a lot of substance. I'll add a little note here that when working on research, I was disappointed at reading a part 1, as that meant there would be a part 2. What I didn't account for was the part 3, leaving these response videos at 2 hours 15 minutes in total.
Okay, hey guys, so I'm gonna just go through this 45-minute video. I haven't watched it yet. I'm just seeing all the comments, and there is just today was a rougher day because I had seen the Discord comments.
It's a clip and response style video where essentially Trisha replies to Ethan's points as he makes them in the video. Responding to the clips as they happen wasn't a good idea because you need to know what points Ethan is at least going to make before you make your own points. Case in point.
Dan saying in the Discord that the crew never asked to have the day off from filming the vlog. They were going to do it. But Ethan told me that it was the crew and they needed some time because me and Ethan had already agreed to vlog, so that was the first lie.
Here Trisha reasserts the idea that it's the crew that refused to film. Now with the DMs we can see why Trisha may have received this impression. With the context that Ethan has provided, we now know that that's not the case, and he doesn't explicitly say that the crew was what was stopping them from filming, more that he thinks they shouldn't film given the situation with the crew. It's a misunderstanding. They happen, but there's no need to perpetuate it when it's cleared up. But these misunderstandings only go further, unfortunately.
If you're the boss and I'm the talent and you're the producer, like, and you care about the well-being, right? It's not a reality show where like people are poking for the drama and wanting drama. If you really don't want the drama, you don't want to hate on your employees, like, why put it out there? Because in my head, when I said put it all out there, like, I really didn't think I had at that point disrespected anybody.
I'm not going to dissect these videos the way I dissected Ethan's video, mainly because Trisha makes a lot of points they'd already made on other platforms. However, I will try to give a brief outline.
Really, I'm like, how did I trash the crew? Like, people are now explaining, like, you know, by you saying like a segment's bad, that is a thing where everybody works, like you're insulting everybody. Like, it's just in my head, I was just talking to Ethan, whatever. I said, dude, let's just end this right now, for real. Like, it's okay for real. It's better if I'm not a part of it. Like, to me, that's where the conversation was headed.
I think Trisha's video ultimately comes down to them wanting to step back because they fundamentally don't understand what they did wrong. And therefore, unless they can come to some personal reconciliation, they can't compromise on the belief that they didn't act out of line. They don't think they're demanding, they don't think they're unreasonable, they're not trying to force people to walk on eggshells.
But again, this kind of thing, like, I have to walk on eggshells with you, I have to keep you happy, like, that's not another reason I don't want to be there. I don't want that work environment, like, I'm trying to keep you happy, because I don't think I make that many demands. We don't, like, anything they've ever talked to me about, I'm just like, yes, yes, yes. It's grown us so much. And I'm obviously appreciative of, like, everything he put in to start, but, like, now that, like, that's obviously been recouped times 100, it's like, can we use some of it? Like, I get that you're still the producer or whatever, but, like, can we use some of it towards, you know, building this thing for, like, us.
They believed the fact that their cut went to production costs should have given them some sort of say in the actual business, and they felt Ethan was unfairly representing the tone of some of their gripes they had with the production. It's clear they wanted Frenemies to become more independent from the H3 podcast, a commitment that Ethan didn't want to make, because as previously explored, he didn't have the belief that Trisha was going to stick around. The 5% is brought up, but Trisha also asserts this is in the context that H3 keeps 100% of the highlights profit, something which Ethan doesn't mention in his response video.
If some percentage is 100% of the highlights and 5% thing is allotted for staff, like it would be cool, again, to get part-time somebody. And if people are hiring like their girlfriends, like why not hire my sister? She's like amazing. From the beginning, he's 100% of the highlights will go towards production costs. So I thought that meant let's get new buildings, let's get new sets, let's get, you know, because the initial investment of $37,000 is a lot. But now that we're like making it, because it's also money that I'm also contributing.
Trisha does downplay their messages to Ethan about the crew that they had unwittingly exposed the night before, but solidly contends this idea that they wanted the crew fired.
You know, that was kind of like a non-starter, is she told me that she wanted a whole new crew for Frenemies because she didn't feel comfortable with them. She wanted a whole new space. She wanted a whole new crew.
Okay, so I honestly, I'm not saying this just to be gaslighty. I really don't remember saying I want a whole new crew at all. Because I don't have any, I wouldn't have, because the first thing he said to me when I wanted was like a producer for Frenemies, like to focus on Frenemies. He's like, Cootie, I had someone right away. It wasn't a whole new crew to replace people. It was like, let's get a camera guy, like for our one-off segments on the thing. And they don't do any of that, which is, again, fine, because they're very casual and relaxed, and they're all kind of like this like friend vibe. But it's like, it would be nice to have a producer to be able to like this, and this. One person I asked, I didn't say fire the crew. I've never, ever said that.
This is a real sticking point for Trisha, and in a way, it is almost a central narrative to understanding what exactly transpired, because Ethan obviously fed back that notion that Trisha wanted a new crew, and that was what provoked the response from them, and eventually led up to Trisha losing their cool in the DMs and quitting the podcast the following morning. If Trisha didn't say that, then Ethan may well have unfairly framed comments they made, even if they weren't very pleasant to begin with. We know Trisha wanted someone in their corner, but that's different to a complete upheaval, and although the DMs certainly don't help their case, there is this unresolved detail that does decide the tone.
I want to fire all of them and get rid of them, hire a new. It's like, okay,
fuck off, Ethan. Fuck off. Like, this is exactly why I can't even talk to him, because he's such a liar, and he's like, this is such a lie, and that he keeps perpetuating this. This is what he keeps saying. I've never once said let's fire the crew. Never once said that. On my grave.
Now, I struggle to comment on this specifically, but going off the evidence, I can't say that Trisha wanted to fire the crew, and I don't think they said that explicitly. But I think given the comments that we have read, Ethan may well have interpreted it that way, especially given how they seem to demean the work the crew had done. And Trisha has a record of trying to push for a particular result without openly stating it. They were clearly unhappy with the current crew. Once again, it seems like a possible miscommunication that could be cleared up. But Trisha takes anything like that as a bad faith personal attack. And although I could understand why they would feel a bit taken out of context, this isn't a gossip forum. You're appealing to fans of the show, and if you want the audience to not view you through that cynical lens, then you have to at least lend some charity, especially with what you've said. But it's Trisha's choice. And after this point in particular, they're clearly driven to view Ethan as a liar and a manipulator.
Not shoot immediately.
Ethan showed the text.
Trisha, you already did.
It's like, it's just not professional to do that on air when the crew is there. It's her first.
So end it. Ethan, end it. It wasn't professional, then end that shit. Like, end it. And I asked him to end it, and he wanted me to have that walk-off moment to say it's unprofessional. He's like, just stop talking about it. He goes, why should I ask you? Why is this? Why are you upset about this? Like, just end it. Like, this is...
Now, once again, here is where the uncharitable perspective is really going to gear. Trisha says if Ethan had a problem, then he should have ended the podcast. This may be a valid point, but you could also argue that he wasn't sure the best way to de-escalate. And there's no guarantee that Trisha would have responded better to him ending the podcast early. Regardless, it could have been a mistake on his part. However, Trisha interprets this as him wanting to get a rise out of them and to have that dramatic walkout moment. Trisha believes that Ethan is weaponizing their previous meltdowns by trying to use them to illustrate a double standard. As Trisha's perception of Ethan changes, their perception of the whole incident changes. Everything is now a manipulative tactic on Ethan's part.
Ultimately, I have to create a safe work environment for my employees.
So don't air. Why? Oh my God. Why? It's so, but again, I don't care. People call me crazy. I'm used to it, call me crazy. It's so manipulative. Like, I have to create a safe workspace for my employees. It's like, you're using this thing, like, you know what I mean? You're using these employees. You said I disrespected them. That was the extent of the issue. Like,
I think the problem is that when Trisha vents, it's Trisha. It's what you expect. And yet when Ethan vents, it suddenly becomes a personal attack to them. I think there are some things that Ethan could have been clear about. Maybe you could even say that as a large public creator, he shouldn't have said it. But it's not like I watched Ethan's video and didn't understand where he was coming from a human perspective. When you lose patience with someone, you might say these things publicly. And it's not like they come from an invalid place.
Ethan is a piece of shit, a piece of garbage that, like, I swear on my life. Like, before this started, I was like, damn, I lost a really good friend, but you are such a liar. It's so fucked up to lie on that. Show me a text from, like, fire the crew, a conversation. Like, that's so fucked and twisted. Just because I've had issues with them, just because I said, like, I don't fight with them, I don't like their sense of humor. I've never said fire people. Are you fucking kidding me right now?
Trisha has this concept of if you're not with them, you're against them. It's like a basic survival instinct and they can't control themselves when responding to these videos. So any point of ability they may have, and I will try and make a case of them later, is lost amongst the anger that someone would ever say these things to you in the first place.
I really tried my best. Like, obviously we have banter on the show, but like, I really don't feel I've been disrespectful. Like, the idea of shooting that segment down, like, that was the disrespectful thing. Like, yes, it was rude. I'm sorry about it, but like, damn, like, the whole crew, you're making up lies and I want them to be fired over that instance and taking this thing that everyone's pissed at me about and snowballing it and creating this monster thing and bringing this back up in my face. Like, then why forgive me in the first place? Like, don't forgive me. Like, just end it there.
Trisha claims that they're in a pretty good place mentally, and they may well be comparatively, but they're not adjusted enough to the YouTube environment. And these videos are just proof of that. It sucks because, once again, I do believe I can make sense of Trisha's qualms, but these videos did not help. I feel like both Trisha and Ethan felt betrayed by each other. How Ethan views Trisha's nature to take everything public and impose unreasonable standards, and how Trisha views Ethan's prejudice towards the situation, and how they feel they're trying to mislead their audience. Once betrayal becomes that central focus, these perspectives are only going to diverge further, which is exactly what happened next.
Oh man, like, I already have a headache watching this. I'm not gonna lie to you guys.
Credit. If not, there's Credit Builder from Credit Karma Money.
Pleasant bourbon for pleasant conversations. Easy sipping, Cedar Ridge.
Like an ungodly amount of merch that I have no idea how I'm going to sell.
But also he doesn't care about money, and he's worried about how it's going to sell.
Every month.
You also get a paycheck every month. You get it from the highlights, you get it from the 5%. You told me yourself, the H3 people were on salary before Frenemies. It's just an extra day for them. You told me that, like, they could, you know, they're already working there. He acts like...
Trisha's videos aren't particularly helpful. I think the problem with this sort of content is that it focuses on a person's reaction in the moment, which when you're dealing with a dispute is obviously going to be more heated than if you would give them time to see the bigger picture. However, one thing that you could at least say is that they were reactions, and therefore they should be taken with a pinch of salt, even if someone felt the drama was being played up by Trisha. They may have been overreactions, but they were reactions all the same. However, Trisha clearly felt like they hadn't quite made their point. After a couple of days of what some may have hoped to be a return to regular content for them, Trisha once more uploaded another video. This time, though, it wasn't a reaction or a response. In fact, its title appeared to imply something much more serious, with a trigger warning clearly expressed in the title. What is the video about itself?
I put up with Ethan purposely triggering me, trying to trigger me on multiple occasions. I always put up with the triggers, and I allowed myself to be triggered. And this is beyond, this is not walking on eggshells. It's like, oh, I say one wrong thing. No, this is times where I'm like, don't share the private messages from episode 1, where he shared messages I sent to him, where he shared Moses' private messages. And we asked him on the show not to.
Well, as it's a Trisha video, there are a fair few clashing narratives. However, the one I'd say is probably the most prominent here is that Trisha believes they were much more lenient than Ethan gave them credit for, despite the fact that they believe Ethan attempted to round them up on multiple occasions. They believe the hand was forced by Ethan's persistent provocation, listing a few examples. A fair few of these seem to be rather insignificant, but the main instance seems to resolve around a trip that Ethan, Ela, Trisha, and their family took to Disney. This was recorded and uploaded in blog form to the H3 podcast channel, and it was pretty well received at the time. However, Trisha seems rather perturbed by a comment Ethan made during this trip about an incident they had also briefly spoken about on the podcast.
When I talk about it, the first things that come to mind obviously are talking to my mom about my sexual assault on a trip from Disneyland, a trip that my mom's sister and Moses had planned for my birthday, and then we did invite Ethan and Hila to come willingly, graciously, because I enjoyed spending time with them. They're, you know.
Okay, let me at least explain myself.
No.
Let me at least explain myself.
Okay.
We're on the party bus, and we all got our own pizzas. I had my, you know, I love the pineapple, black olive. Nobody else wanted it, so I started picking the cheese off. Okay, and I was just eating the toppings, and the pizza looked like a burn victim. It was all disgusting. So anyway, you looked at it, you're like, that is so disgusting. I can't look at it. Like, that's just the grossest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, it was really gross. I physically had to lay down after it.
And I said, Trisha, who are you to talk about gross things? You've shoved a candlestick up your ass. But the reason I said it is because they literally know everything about the show.
Why would I?
Which means that I know that they know the meme.
It's not something they want to talk about, or you want to bring up in front of your family.
But like, well, they were looking at me like, okay, maybe I fucked up.
Alongside the other examples, it feels like Trish is having one of their revelations in rationalizing their own behavior, crafting this narrative that their reaction was actually the result of continuous comments and incidents that they failed to address themselves, and therefore let boil over in the eventual meltdown that occurred in that fateful episode. However, one really has to question what motivated them to use such a provocative title, when the topic, although somewhat sensitive, isn't exactly communicated with the same sense of pertinence to the actual subject being discussed. I'm not trying to say a trigger warning was unnecessary, or that it makes any discourse of it less valid, but in the established canon of Trisha's upload history on Frenemies, the video advertised itself as much more serious than other content that they've produced on this specific matter, despite the fact that this was once more an analysis of the often fractured dynamic between the two. However, it is a bit more accusatory given that Trisha alleges that Ethan's provocation of them was intentional.
Like, all of that was like triggers, right? When I asked to the very last episode, like, we need to stop, and he's like, yes, you can go up and leave whenever you want, you know what I mean? Like, up until even that point, he wanted me to do that thing, and I'm like, I just want to end this.
This represents this increasingly cynical perspective that each party held of each other, and in his response, Ethan followed suit. Now, given his relevance to the situation, it's no surprise that Ethan wasn't too flattered by how the video was publicized. However, he decided to go one step further, stating that Trisha's video on the matter goes as far to accuse him of sexual harassment, specifically referring to the comments that Trisha made about his commentary on their new skin product.
And then up until like the last episode, like, everyone was like, it's clear Trisha was in a bad mood, but it was a lot of things, from sexualizing my skincare product. Like, you know, I was just like that. I was like, you know, because it's not just my line.
Now, I would stop short of saying that Trish was trying to accuse him of sexual harassment, but I also don't really understand why Ethan's observation had to be construed as sexual. As they say in the episode, it's childish humor, seeing something perhaps rude in an otherwise unassuming scene.
And this is the secret. I'm so happy to finally.
Also kind of phallic.
What?
You say, Trish, what's the secret? And then you show like it looks like a cock. What? Balls and cock.
What are you talking about?
Look, 2 balls and a cock. It's like a giant phallus.
Oh my god. It's the products in the
Bro, it's literally
no, that's just Ethan being immature, bro.
So childish.
With that in mind, I can understand why Ethan feels like he's being misrepresented. However, the draw towards a discussion surrounding the semantics of sexual harassment feels a bit sudden, and Trisha once more jumps on that to quickly defend themselves and say they weren't accusing anyone of such a claim. Harking on Ethan's previous comments about them wanting to fire the crew suggests that he has a bit of a habit of strawmanning Trisha's comments. At this point, Trisha and Ethan couldn't even agree on what each other were saying, but some felt like Trisha blurred the line in their comments with the intent of taking advantage of Ethan's defensive response, while critics of Ethan thought he was trying to stir up emotion against Trisha by making their claims seem stronger than they were.
Ethan incidentally invited himself to our family surprise, and We paid for him. Ethan and Ela did not pay for their VIP ticket to Disneyland. We ended up paying for Ethan and Ela, which is crazy because he takes that 5%, and VIP tickets to Disneyland is not cheap. And I don't know why he felt compelled to ask me and my mom or bring it up in the situation that how we felt about her having a candlestick up her, you know what? It made us very uncomfortable, especially we had just such a fun day. And it was really disgusting. I think that he wanted the shock value, but I think that he forgets that we're family at the end of the day, and I was not appreciative of that.
The next few days, though, were just pure chaos. Trisha's sister decided to weigh in, supporting Trisha's statement and alleging that Ethan and Ela invited themselves to Disney and had their tickets paid for. Ethan then responds to this sister, Carly, on the After Dark podcast, trying to take a more jocular outlook on the whole situation, but still visibly irritated.
And to be honest with you guys, I'm just trying to make the best of this situation that is quite sour, to be frank. And so I watched this with peace and love. So she's first of all saying we invited ourselves to her surprise party. This is where it's just so frustrating for me. You know, we obviously didn't invite ourselves. We were invited. As Trisha even says in her video, it's like they can't even keep their stories straight.
Trisha then responds to H3, calling them out for this and saying that the sister isn't involved, but also being sufficiently passive-aggressive to boot. And it just felt like this endless cycle of people trying to have the final word. When everyone wants the final word, no one's going to have it.
Ethan does this thing where he punches down on people, right? Like, he obviously knows he has a really loyal fan base, and they're a really loud fan base. I'm obviously the one getting all the hate. They see that. So for them to do this video, like, defending themselves when I'm the one getting all the hate, it's like, it's really just punching down. It's just punching when it's low. My sister deleted that TikTok within an hour.
Trisha's newest video further sought to justify their own perspective by making Ethan look more unreasonable than he believed himself to be. Allegations that although he tried to laugh at, he clearly construed as very serious, and similarly hit back at Trisha. And as they took to social media to relentlessly attack each other, it began to feel like there may be no way back. However, if one fact is indisputable, Trisha is consistently inconsistent. And although that would once again change their tone, this time, it didn't quite heal the wound.
Pate for the cat, pate for the cat, meow.
Great prices, happy pets, Chewy.
Dealing with one of these, you need the free Fix Finder service from AutoZone. It checks these warning lights.
With each of Trisha's videos, it felt strange, because in spite of the fact they were clearly unhappy with Ethan Klein, there also appeared to be this expectation that by the next Tuesday, they'd be back at the studio and this would all be water under the bridge. Trisha even alludes to this themselves in a tweet, one which Ethan very quickly rebuked. I'm not subscribed to the school of philosophy that believed Trisha was only upset about the money. And it's not that I don't think there were no legitimate qualms, but it felt like Trisha's videos from a certain point were designed to elicit a reaction from Ethan. And I don't think they did because they loathed Ethan or they wanted to hurt him. I think it's because they almost wanted to play out the situation so that there could be some degree of mutual responsibility spread to the point where they would be inclined to patch it up on the podcast. Although leaving with the usual fireworks, it's clear that Trisha still had a part of them tied to the podcast, even at one point starting their own show called Enemies, which as you can assume was Frenemies without Ethan, something they referred to a few times.
So yeah, this is the podcast Enemies, where I just make enemies because that's just what I do, and I guess I owe it up to this. Disclaimer, I actually don't want enemies. I will speak the same truth I spoke on Frenemies, but people don't care if there's not like a man next to me. And that's just like the world we live in. I'm not trying to be over here like feminist, whatever. Like, I'm fine with that. Like, I'm happy to leech onto another dude, like for my next venture. Like, you know, that's just how it has to be if my voice is gonna be heard. I have an apology to Ethan and the staff coming out this week. Me just like, go watch Frenemies. I support him having a new co-host or co-hosts if he has multiple. We had ad reads for the whole year, so, you know, get that bag, get that coin.
In the past, this sort of outburst had motivated Ethan to bring on Dr. Drew, discuss their differences and find some sort of compromise on how to move forward, something that once again Trisha references in one of their response videos. However, this time Ethan didn't really change his tune and wasn't interested in resolving any differences between himself and Trisha with their relationship in the state that it was. And less than 24 hours after the launch of Trisha's new podcast, where they take multiple jabs at Ethan, there is once more a change of message.
Like, the very first thing my therapist told me was like 4 things, which is like, get plenty of sleep, get out of the house and socialize at least a couple times a week, and, you know, eat a couple meals that are good for you, put good stuff into your body, and do physical activity, like even for 20 minutes a day. And I just like neglected basically all of that. I was like, oh, whatever, I'm in therapy. But those are like really just like simple things that, again, probably everybody does, but I just never did. And I've been doing the past week and I feel more centered. It really did change chemicals in my brain. I have been on medication. That's not a excuse, I'm just telling you guys, because I was put on new medication at the end of May, and people say it takes up to it can take 6 to 8 weeks to like kick in, so I'm going to be like on the like 6-week mark.
Yes. In this video called Apology to Ethan, Trisha reveals that they've been taking better care of themselves and have come to the conclusion that they actually have some apologizing to do. Fantastic.
I just hope that this can give them some sort of peace to know where I am at, and it is totally up to them if they want to accept the apology or not. This is my apology, and I kind of avoided it because this was the Taurus in me. I am pretty stubborn. Sometimes I'm like, but I also owed an apology in this, and I had to really let that go to find peace with myself. Like, I don't want to feel like people owe me anything, but I don't feel that way in my heart, truly. I hope Ethan watches this. He doesn't watch my long videos. He usually gets them summarized. But if you see just this little clip, I'm very sorry, Ethan, for breaking your trust.
After a rather meandering analysis of their mental health, they speak about how much they have messed up. They don't really speak about too many of the issues in depth, but they try to elaborate on their mindset and how this impacted their behavior towards the clients, and how they felt responsible for sabotaging the podcast because of their feelings. Of the incidents in question, they do apologize for the distasteful jokes they made in the DMs that they leaked. They also apologize for not going to Ethan privately, and just generally their demeanor and how it impacted those around them. Frame those actions as ones yielded from an unhealthy mindset.
I apologize because it was disrespectful for what I said. For whatever, this is where like it was never my intention to attack the crew. I see exactly how it came across, and I see it very clearly, and I'm so embarrassed because, again, I'm a mess. I'm a messy person. I'm drama. I have issues, as everyone does, but I've always prided myself in being like a nice person. I apologize for bringing up money. I apologize for just really, again, poor communication. I feel like I worked on communication so much in my relationship that I've neglected to work on communication like on other ways, like speaking up when even little things, speaking up if I don't like something or don't think, I'm such a hype person. I like to like hype everything. I love it, love it, love it. And then like it got me in trouble with Nikado, and I was like, yes, let's hang out. And then I hype, and then ghost because I love to hype. I don't ever like to shoot down ideas. I don't, you know what I mean? But I really need to be better at communicating when I don't like something, I don't want to do something, and just be better at it and just grow a pair of balls and talk about it. I'm really sorry. I really am. It's now it's the stages of a Trish freak out, and like I feel good. I feel strong. I feel like, you know, loved and cared for over here. Ethan, the crew, and Hila, that I'm sorry, and I hope in time that we will be able to talk again. Like, I know once trust is broken, like it's nearly impossible to gain back, but I'm willing to put an effort.
I don't think it's necessarily the wrong way to go about it. It's important that you make people understand where you're coming from and how your mindset may have caused you to act out in a particular way. And some appear to praise him for this. However, some also question whether this should have been done privately first. And not too long after, Ethan Klein replied, echoing other people's issues and emphasizing the damage he believed they had caused with their prior content.
She said in her video, I'm going to make this apology and Ethan doesn't have to accept it. It's not that I don't accept her apology. It's that I don't want to gloss over too much what went down. I mean, it's a lot for me to forgive this fast.
Now, I think a public apology for a public issue is always useful because viewers know where you stand. But Trish had reached the stage where so much of themselves was online that each public video felt performative, and therefore Ethan was going to be suspicious of this sudden about turn, even for Trisha. I think the problem, and this once again ties back to Dr. Drew, with the previous onset of disputes, it became an established solution to almost use other things as a medium to channel frustrations that they weren't prepared to express, let things escalate, and then rely on the other party's recognition of that matter. I don't doubt that Trisha likely had qualms with the process of the podcast and didn't know how to express them at first, so lashed out unnecessarily. However, with the context of the subsequent videos and the apology, the initial departure didn't actually feel like a genuine expression of intent. It felt like a way to once again make a statement on a problem that they perceived. In many of these videos, Trisha would emphasize how they're sound of mind now, either due to therapy or changes to their lifestyle, as a way to justify how this was them now speaking with clarity. It was a way to frame their past behavior as impulsive, not the real them. But with this, it was difficult to know when we were ever receiving the real Trisha. It felt like Trisha was trying different techniques for the same result, trying to present each one as their real findings and then gauging reaction. Despite my criticisms, though, I will say one thing. It showed that regardless of the defensive front, that Trisha still clearly cared about their friendship with Ethan. Really, all these methods screamed to me that this was someone who wanted something but didn't know how to get it. Unfortunately, because of previous instance, it seemed that the easiest route was to be somewhat hostile. This time, however, Ethan drew a line, and in spite of what may have been an apology, Ethan couldn't accept it. He acknowledged and even appreciated it, but he stopped short of accepting it. The apology may have come from a genuine place, who knows, but it couldn't overshadow the fact that it followed 2 weeks of continuous public mudslinging. It felt like Trisha was looking for the end, but didn't understand the means. If this was 20 days earlier, then maybe it would have started rebuilding that bridge. But at this point, the ravine between the two was just far too wide. How was Ethan to know that this wasn't just another vehicle in an attempt to relaunch Frenemies? There were lots of points that could have marked the firm end of Frenemies, but I think Ethan's tepid response to Trisha's apology indicated the return of the podcast was beyond hope. I think Ethan had come to terms with this end not too long after Trisha had announced they were stepping down, and this was his ultimatum to Trisha to accept it as well. How would they move forward from this? Well, sometimes frenemy ships aren't built to last.
I was having relationship issues with my old bank. It was just take. So I moved to SoFi Checking and Savings.
Get 2.50% interest and earn up to $300 when you set up direct deposit. SoFi, get your money right.
Ethan addressed Trisha's apology one more time in a segment on Off the Rails. In this, he echoed many of the sentiments that he'd expressed on Twitter, in a much more discernible tone of frustrated exasperation, asserting that although he wasn't opposed to an eventual reconciliation, he wasn't prepared to forgive so quickly and needed time. He also wasn't prepared to let someone like Trisha close again. With that in mind, was not interested in reviving the podcast. Yet this was far from the end.
It's a lot for me to forgive this fast because this is a person who I considered, you know, family, a close friend, someone I trusted, someone that we were working together with, that I had a very close relationship, someone who I was confiding in. She honestly, without mincing words, was trying to like ruin my life. to she was saying everything she could to attack me personally, to attack the business. If this is an apology to me, why do I have to watch it on her YouTube channel with 10 mid-rolls? A phone call would have been nice. She has my number. She knows that I'm open to talk anytime. She messed, you know what I mean? And she apologized to the crew. She said previously she doesn't have any of the crew's contact information. I'm sorry, but that's not true. We're all in a group chat on WhatsApp. She has everybody's phone number.
Around a week and a half after, Trish uploaded a video claiming there was an unaired episode of Frenemies which featured a greater reconciliation between the two parties, including an apology from Ethan. Many seem to believe this was filmed to promote their post-breakup merchandise release that was being dropped around the same time. However, after the merch sold out nearly instantaneously, the motive to upload the video was assumedly diminished. After Trish's video covering this, many podcast fans requested that Ethan not upload the video as they didn't want the drama prolonged, and the episode, whatever its contents, was never released. Following this, there was a moment of respite, as it seemed that both had just grown apart, and even if reconciliation wasn't possible, the absence of conflict was a welcome break for most viewers. However, it always felt like a ceasefire as opposed to a peace treaty, mainly due to this suggested rapprochement on Trish's video. It's very hard for me to speculate on what may or may not have been said, because the only source is Trisha, and they do have their biases. But if this video marked some sort of understanding between the two, then it wasn't to be recognized by anyone outside. And in future videos, the underlying message was that there was still unresolved tension.
She's always been really nice. I have no issues with Hila. It's like literally was between me and Ethan, but Ethan like drags like a lot of people. And obviously it's his wife, obviously. Yeah. But like personally, like, you know, we haven't talked or anything, but like I'm totally, like, we've never had an issue. I think it's more because I'm like Ethan and I'm like totally over it now. I mean, I don't know, but
have you guys talked?
No, we're like really? Yeah.
For a while, this seemed like Trisha's angle, and maybe if this philosophy had sustained itself, an eventual modification would have been reached. But unfortunately, this was not the case. As I noted earlier, regardless of what you think of the apology, it felt more like another momentary decision rather than a concrete resolution. For many people, an apology normally marks the end of something, a concession that you'd be foolish to walk back on. At the same time, sometimes if people feel they've been manipulated into making a confession, they may retract it, and as time transpired, Trisha seemed to walk back their narrative once more, slowly returning to their former position. They really had done nothing wrong, and the responsibility primarily lay with Ethan.
I think the ending, like, honestly wasn't my fault. No, but like the last podcast, he like admitted to like, oh yeah, because he like, you know, whatever. It's like a whole thing to get into, but he like screenshotted my text, sent him to his staff. He's like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. You know, basically like saying that I wanted them fired. And I was like, show me a text message. So he basically like lied, whatever. And I think he ultimately couldn't continue the show because he was the one that was like at fault.
It felt like the situation ultimately wasn't resolved. Trisha felt inclined to continuously make these statements to try and keep it alive, while making it look like they weren't necessarily going out of their way to talk about it. Coincidentally, appearing on these podcasts who just seemed to be interested in discussing the latest tea. Throughout all this, Ethan really didn't say much, and whether that influenced Trisha's next move is your judgment to make. What move was that, I hear you ask? Well, as I mentioned a while back, Ethan's often quite vocal with who he despises, and one person who definitely fits that bill is Keemstar, who Ethan has waged war against for a good few years. Trish, in many ways, also seemed to be vocally critical of Keemstar, attacking him for a variety of reasons over the years. But if Trish's relationship with Ethan taught us anything, is that Trish's sentiments can be known to fluctuate a little. At that time, Keemstar had found himself in some controversy due to the age gap in his relationship with a 20-year-old female. At the same time, both Ethan and Trisha had separately taken to YouTube to criticize him, Ethan on his After Dark podcast, and Trisha on their third episode of Enemies.
And she doesn't know that I play bad guy Keem online. Okay, if you're bad guy Keem online and that's a character you're playing, Daniel Keem, then you're an actual creep in real life. Like, you are actually a real life perv, a real life just creep, just evil, just a nasty old man that's like hurting this girl in ways that she may not know. But you know, because I know he knows, because he's constantly bringing up things people are gonna say, the power play, the this, but she's not a fan. Trying to rationalize it on the show, on Spotify, on his podcast is like mind blowing to me.
Keemstar played this off with the usual bombast that many expected from him, leaning into the stereotype rather than running away from it. If anything, it showed that neither side was willing to yield. Yet for some fans, it may have been refreshing that Ethan and Trisha finally agreed on something once more. But this moment of blissful harmony was short-lived, as less than a week after this, Keemstar tweeted a picture of him with FaZe Banks, alongside, lo and behold, Trisha Paytas, all looking rather pleased with themselves. I wonder why. This, of course, provoked a response from Ethan, who expressed disappointment at Trisha's newfound allegiance. Trisha responded over a variety of mediums, but we're going to skip over those for now. However, what would the podcast actually be about? After all, you can't just judge a book by its cover, and Trish requested that everyone give the episode a chance.
I met Ethan going on his podcast because he did a vile video about criticizing girls' looks, saying that they look like whales, Twinkies, that I look like a corpse, I look like a WWE wrestler, showing before and afters that I posted myself, trying to be like, wow, they're really fooling you. Just vile shit. And I just went on his podcast because I'm like, let me have a discussion, let me see where this goes.
In the podcast, Keemstar explains how he'd reached out to Trisha offering a truce, and Trisha had agreed. Trisha is fast to clarify that they're not necessarily befriending Keemstar, and they're actually still more pro-Ethan than pro-Keem, though they definitely don't hold back in analysing Ethan's behaviour over the previous months.
Trisha, Ethan will not put himself in a situation where he knows he's going to lose, all right? This is why the last podcast of Frenemies, like, never aired, right?
Yeah.
Can I say that publicly? Am I allowed?
Oh, okay. There's an unaired last episode?
Yeah, we shot one more for like closure, and it was like really good because I do feel like I fucked up a lot by like the first time like Ethan like admitted to like screenshotting my text on his girl stuff, and I was like, oh perfect, like this will give me some redeeming qualities because he admitted in that I never said fire the crew. And I was like, perfect, people are gonna know, they're gonna stop hating on me. But then yeah, he didn't post it because he's like, well, I don't want more hate to the crew and it's gonna stress out this person. And I was just like, you posted all my breakdowns, but you're not gonna post this one where I kind of look like at least we're balanced and being in the wrong. Yeah. So I have a little animosity towards him. Like, I still obviously like love Ethan, but like I do have a little bit of that. I get what you're saying.
I think being sat down with two people who have a history of conflict with Ethan kind of draws Trisha into this discussion about him more than they probably planned to be. The conversation isn't just about Ethan, but it regularly returns to him, with Keemstar driving home the point that in his opinion, Ethan is a moral weathervane and bans the popular opinions to garner a social advantage while receiving special treatment from YouTube. Trisha often plays off this narrative with their own personal experiences, talking about many of the previous incidents that still seem unresolved to them.
So he's a walking, talking hypocrite.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that because I'm also a walking, talking hypocrite. I think again, it's just the lack of like admitting that. Like I feel like if you can admit it, because I 100% like even me sitting here, people are like, she's so hypocritical, whatever, you know what I mean? But I don't think it is that either. I honestly think it's just like having a discussion. But
I want to bully. I want to harass. I want to fucking talk shit. I do.
Toxic, man.
I want to roast this guy, but I can't because YouTube won't let me. But he can say, I got a little dick, fuck puppets. Like, what is this?
Right. And I think that is like the hypocrisy of Ethan.
Imagine if you were silenced by YouTube and you couldn't say anything about Ethan, but he was just dunking on you, saying you're the reason why Frenemies. Like, you'd get so frustrated.
Make a video, respond, to get strike down. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's weird.
No, totally agree. I agree. I mean, I think it's like gross when people do make fun of people's like looks or small penises or whatever. I don't like when people make fun of people's like, aesthetic. But I'm telling you, that's how me and Ethan first met. He made a whole video calling me like a whale, like a corpse, like all this stuff, saying how like I photoshopped my pictures. So like he did the same.
Yeah. And this is what Def Noodles does in his roast battles. Well, apparently he's not having his roast battles anymore. I'm not entirely sure if that's true. He canceled this Friday, but yeah, I don't like making fun of people's looks neither. Like, I don't recall when I made fun of somebody's looks. I probably did like around high school, but like years ago, you know, I wouldn't meme, but generally anymore, I don't think attack people's look as. I'd rather go after like the terrible actions that they do and call them out for that. That's what I'd rather do.
Thing to me, so it is a little hypocritical, but I do think, I mean, that was
ironic that this was approximately a year after Keem had offered a truce to Ethan, who started Frenemies shortly after. This time it was Keem's turn to platform Trisha, though. It seems that Keem had worked out that although Trisha talked a big game, they were regularly swayed, and in this case, it worked out almost exactly as envisioned. Well, for Keem at least. This wasn't out of the ordinary for Trisha. They're known to go on podcasts with people they have grievances with. That's why they appeared on the H3 podcast in the first place. However, given how the discussion does tend to pivot towards Ethan, and given how Ethan doesn't quite share the same philosophy, people weren't entirely happy. And neither was Ethan.
Everyone has money goals, but knowing how to reach them isn't always clear. That's why Credit Karma connects your finances in one place to help your hard work pay off, so you can go from getting by to flying high. Create your own karma.
In this situation, even the photo of Trisha with Keemstar had provoked a bit of uproar from the clients. However, there was also a bit more context that makes the circumstances more prime for hostility.
I'm not even gonna front or try to be funny. This just really makes me sad.
The girl is not to blame for anything.
Yeah.
The girl is only 20 years old. She's a child. Yes. We love, I mean, well, I don't know anything about her, but I'm not going after her at all. I was never going to criticize her or say anything bad about her. This is just about a 39-year-old creep preying on a young girl.
In the video covering Keemstar's new girlfriend, Ethan included a segment which entailed an individual calling in claiming to be this lady and going into rather explicit detail about the relationship. Keemstar felt that there was a double standard being operated here and tweeted a video tagging Team YouTube and talking about the situation at hand.
You know, I'm fucking so sick of this one-sided bullshit, right? All I want to do is talk shit to these motherfuckers. That's all I want to do, but I can't because YouTube will kick me out of the fucking partnership program, right? If I do that. I literally have the emails here threatening me that that's going to happen. Can't do creator on creator harassment. But Ethan Klein has made about 50 fucking videos breaking TOS, breaking the bullying harassment thing. He uploaded a fucking video of a Keemstar puppet and he's like fucking it. How is that not breaking YouTube TOS? How's that not breaking the bullying and harassment thing? Now he uploads this video with someone that's supposed to be my new girlfriend. It's like a fake person calling in and they're like, yeah, Keem's got a little dick. Keem's dick doesn't work. And am I over here crying about it? Absolutely not. But let me talk shit back. I really want to fucking know, Susan, Team YouTube, everybody at YouTube, why is it Keemstar versus H3H3? I've sent emails when he broke TOS saying, hey, look, he's doing the same thing that you threatened to kick me out of the partnership program, and it gets ignored. Explain the blatant fucking bias. Because all of these fucking YouTubers, David Dobrik, everyone else, has dealt with this bullshit with Ethan Klein. Why is it other YouTubers versus Ethan Klein and YouTube staff? Please explain it to all of us right now, why he's getting special privileges.
Not too long after this, the H3 After Dark video on the matter was removed for violating YouTube's terms of service, with many assuming that Keemstar played a hand in this. Though he denied direct involvement in the removal of the video, it was hard to completely buy this idea that his vocal outcries hadn't influenced YouTube in some sort of way, with many requesting to see his flag history. For someone like Ethan, who already vehemently loathed Keemstar, there was no two ways about it. Keemstar had committed an attack on the podcast, and a former Friends alliance at a time of heightened conflict was a stonewall betrayal. With this in mind, in his first H3 Off the Rails back, Ethan decides to address Trisha Paytas one last time.
So basically what this is to me, she is a, what was the name of that the famous turncoat during the Revolutionary? Benedict Arnold? Yeah, she Benedict Arnold me big time. This is an unforgivable, traitorous act. And I'm going to explain in great detail why. And I'm going to be totally honest with you guys. A part of me wanted to take the high road on this and just ignore it. But at the same time, I'm so sick of her disrespecting me and my family and causing shit and just being so toxic, lying. And I'm just so freaking over her.
Now, as I've noted, it's not exactly surprising taking a perfunctory look at Trisha's history. They wanted to go on Keem's podcast. Though Ethan certainly compiles a fair assembly of clips that make even this decision look a bit inconsistent on Trisha's part, especially given their familial relation, throwing some shade towards Moses as well. Trisha's even gone on podcasts with Gabby Hanna previously, so it's clear that they're not entirely hostile to anyone. But in a way, although it makes sense that Trisha would do this, the question Ethan wants to ask is, should she?
Why do you think Keemstar posted this clip to tease the podcast? Do you guys want to take any guesses? Could it be because Moses is on the couch and he wanted to rock the boat that way? Is it because his 20-year-old girlfriend that Trisha just ripped into him a week ago is sitting right there next to Moses and everyone's just happy-go-lucky? And Trisha literally says, how did this story get blown out of proportion? Girl, what? Go ahead,
playing
Trisha,
Daniel Keem, then you're an actual creep in real life. Like, you are actually a real life perv, a real life just creep, just evil, just a nasty old man that's like hurting this girl in ways that she may not know, but you know.
Also, Jesse and all these other people that you've been an absolutely disgusting, vile person to. You are disgusting, you are a liar and a psychopath, and you need serious help. So don't even think for a second that you're trolling or ruining or anyone thinks you're relevant.
So she has that much energy for an R-word apologist, but keep the same energy because Keemstar, on the same exact situation, said way worse things. And if you care about Jessie Smiles, she seemed to have been way more offended by what Keemstar said than Gabby. Of the protecting. You have handled this situation with such poor taste. You're right, you don't know what happened, but you sure felt like you did all these years when you consistently called me a liar, mocked my accusations. Sorry you hate all these R-word cases. By the way, it must be hard on you. And she included a screenshot of Keemstar saying, sorry, Jessie Smiles, tagged her on Twitter, only has 140 characters. Please don't accuse me of R-word. He's making a joke out of it. Basically accusing her of making false, allegations. This is just one specific example of Keemstar's continued
man, what have this site gotten into? Oh my God.
In part, he does respond to the narratives espoused throughout the podcast, but more tries take a holistic standpoint that this is Keemstar taking advantage of Trisha for his own game, showing a variety.
Shout out Jessie Smiles though, bro. Like, I think she took like the high road in all this YouTube drama, especially with her podcast with Lily and Megan. I think, they're doing good for themselves, so shout out to them.
Tweets and clips that seem to imply that Keemstar is enjoying the situation much more than anyone else is, even supposedly inviting Gabby Hanna on the same day they were hosting Trisha and joking about it with FaZe Banks on the podcast.
Keemstar ends the show early so that he can bring, of all people, in the same studio on the same day, Gabby Hanna, wearing the same clothing. Banks is in the same clothing. Keemstar's not wearing his trademark jorts, because I think he took a swim. We'll get into that too. Yeah, Banks is in the same outfit and Keemstar just got jorts on. Legend. Here now again, she's a free speech advocate all of a sudden, and she believes in talking to anyone about anything, right? So they're kind of teasing her a little bit. They're kind of making a fool out of her. Listen to this.
He was here. Imagine. No, but listen. Imagine if Gabby was here and we posted a picture: FaZe Banks, Keemstar, Trisha, Gabby.
Bro, I like how they download these videos, these snippets exactly, just to like play it. It's wild.
The internet was
She's there. Gabby's there, or at least she's on her way there. So Keem starts being like, well, can you imagine if Gabby was here?
He's touching the water a little bit.
Says, I'd bolt.
Interesting.
Break.
I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't do that to you.
On the whole, though, this video is designed to be the final nail in the coffin for Ethan and Trisha's working relationship, and dare I say it, friendship. He even goes on to discuss the unaired episode which Trisha had been bringing up over the last month, and explains that the reason it wasn't released was because he didn't feel like it gave anyone the closure Trisha claims it did, and it was actually quite an uncomfortable recording, which he rather regrets. He also notes that Trisha claims to have recorded the episode and has been alluding to it in the DMs, stating that he is not fazed by the implication that they may release it.
How everything had gone down. I was feeling bad about the rift that it had caused in the family and everything, and I wanted to make amends. And in my heart, I thought, what would be great is if we could just come together for one final episode, for it to be wholesome, for it to be just a beautiful experience where we just reflect on the nice experience we have and part ways amicably. As soon as we sat down, basically almost immediately, it just went sideways. It just went off the rails. It just turned into more accusations, and it just got really icky. And I was like immediately regretting it because it was just not at all what I wanted or expected. This whole claim that like I had never apologized to her, she keeps saying like he apologized. I proved that I never said I wanted to fire the crew. I admitted in my first video about Trisha leaving Frenemies that I messed up in showing the crew the tech. They secretly recorded us, which was like kind of devastating to me, that they came into the house, secretly recorded our conversations before and after the podcast and during. The thing is, I don't care if they release it, so it's not like a threat. I don't know why they think it's such a big deal. It's just a messy episode. But I guess in their mind, they think they've been threatening us with like, well, we recorded it, here it is, we're going to release it, I'm listening to it back. It's like, I just found that like such a violation to come into our house and secretly record us. I was like, wow.
This may not be closure per se, but it is the closest that people were going to have. Two contrasting yet affirmative perspectives. From this, people could draw their own conclusions. However, beyond the basic allegations of hypocrisy, there was a more troubling allegation. Hypocrisy is when you say something in the moment and contradict that at a later time. And although it can be problematic, it's not particularly exceptional, especially in this industry, particularly as you often can't decipher intent. However, Ethan once more chose to go in on Trisha, accusing them of lying over a variety of issues relating to the podcast, including statements they had made since.
Here's a great one. There's this TikTok account, Contradictions of Trisha, which is like this. Whoever's operating this on another level, watch this. They made a great summary of the situation. Yeah.
Have her on. We are in family.
Have her on.
He did show me something. I'm not gonna say what it was. I don't want to put this on blast. But he did show me something. He's like, I would never do that to you. Like, he showed me something that could have happened that didn't. Do you know what I'm talking about? Can he show me that thing? He's like, oh, maybe you don't know. But he showed me something that like really devastated me. Like really hurt me. He's like, I would never do that to you. Like, not gonna lie. I almost texted him just now. Anyways, it does not want that. Like he didn't. It could have been just like an
How many followers does this account have? Oh my god.
They're actually, well, because...
He also gave some attention to accounts that seem dedicated to showing these rather conscious contradictions, particularly those on TikTok. He seems quite amused by most of these clips, and although you can understand why they would have irked him, often after the collapse of a working relationship, you are prone to trash talk your former colleague a little. So these aren't exactly surprising. However, there is one clip that he seems to take slightly more seriously, relating to an anecdote that Trisha shared while the podcast was still operating fairly smoothly.
Dude, I'm over it. I'm just totally over it. But here's something I saw that actually really disturbed me.
My dog was because of David and Jason. They just surprised me with it for a vlog and made me keep it, even though I never asked for a dog. And yes, we did talk about this. Everyone was like, oh my god, you can't just surprise me with a puppy. I've been wanting a puppy for a really long time. We had talked about it for a while, that I wanted a Pomeranian, that my mom would help me take care of it.
Just to be clear, we did talk about this, and the plan was to maybe give the dog to Trisha's mom, who really wants Pomeranian. So
yeah, I've always said I wanted a Pomeranian, but my mom would have to help take care of it. So we're a team effort with this. I wanted a Pomeranian for a long time. Both me and my mom have wanted a puppy for so long. I live alone. My mom lives alone.
What's the color you wanted too, right?
Yeah, he's adorable. This color is just perfect. Everyone who meets him falls in love with him. They just surprised me with it for a vlog and made me keep it. We're gonna try and get some houses because we honestly want more. We just love this little guy so much. We just love him so much, and hopefully that'll show in here. We want 2 more. We want a little black one and possibly a white one. I never asked for a dog. I don't get a dog.
You want a what?
You want to buy a dog today? I never asked for a dog. Can I get a dog?
Oh my god.
My dog was because of David and Jason. They just surprised me with it for a vlog and made me.
It's so disturbing to me how she's openly lying.
In this clip, Trisha's prior behavior appears to directly refute all available testimony that they articulated on Frenemies, leaving Ethan rather bemused, and even concerned as to Trisha's capability to expound mistruths.
So disturbing to me how she's openly lying. She really convinced me of this dog lie, and she really successfully assassinated their character. Now, I mean, this specifically has me questioning everything, and I can't help but wonder if I've just been a useful idiot to her this whole time. And the essay allegation about them, like all that stuff that was made publicly separate of her is like, you know, 100% believable. But like this dog thing, like I just feel like I've been the useful idiot to her the whole time to smear these people that she hates, because this is a flat out horrific lie to make about someone.
In a way, this was the only significant development on the situation. Trisha's appearance on Mum's Basement didn't really change the narrative too much. We knew what each party would probably say. We know where these people stand on each other. However, this moment seemed to at least prompt a brief reassessment of the podcast by Ethan, and this reassessment would only yield more questions in the coming month. Trisha's commented on countless issues and shared many anecdotes in extensive detail, often more detail than a majority of people would ever be expected to recall. Some of these were related to YouTube dramas like the David Dobrik saga, but there were also a lot of personal stories which they opened up about. And as a person with their own trauma, they would share some of these stories to an often very sympathetic audience. One of these stories that was particularly harrowing was about a teacher who had violated them while they were in school, an experience unfortunately a lot more common than we'd like it to be. But at the time, it was a very powerful moment on the podcast, and they had a set of people surrounding them who were ready to support them. However, with some questions beginning to arise about Trisha's accuracy in delivering information, a new light was shone onto some of these allegations.
Native has fantastical scents like coconut and vanilla, sea salt and cedar, eucalyptus and mint. And dozens more. It's like an ice cream parlor for your pet.
September 2021 was a rough month. Trisha's decision to appear on Mum's Basement had already put a further strain on the family relationship, under burden from numerous incidents, some of which were documented on the H3 podcast.
What you texted Moses is the most evil thing to ever put out into the universe. If I'm a weasel, you are Satan.
Oh my goodness, she thinks I cast a spell on her too.
She said, you are Satan for even putting that energy out there. You're an evil woman to write down what you wrote. It's unspeakable. To put that burden on me the way you did is the worst karma.
This was continuously manifested with other family members involving themselves, one of them being Moses Ackman, the individual who served as the keystone in the connection between the Kleins and Paters. He had recently become more vocal in his participation after certain claims were made about his conduct, defending himself while also criticizing Ethan for his behavior. As both parties stewed in the fallout of the latest strife, questions were being raised about the story that Trisha told on episode 17, the violation story.
Not funny, but like my 6th grade teacher, yeah, I talked about it on TikTok, the one that used to, he would play like heads down, and he'd come around and like grab my breast and like put his hands on me. He did get arrested. His name was Mr.
You or because of other incidents?
So someone else came forward. I never did.
Gross.
But he had on his computer at the
Oh
school. But that guy did. He did get arrested, and I don't know where he is now, but he did.
One of the details Trisha divulged during this anecdote was that this teacher was eventually arrested on charges of CP. However, with some digging, certain people began to uncover information that disputed this claim. As a matter of fact, it was discovered that the teacher mentioned had retired from his role, passing on from this world in 2019. Along with other supposed inconsistencies, this was covered in a 1.5-hour video uploaded by a creator called Mysterious.
Then the 4th time she mentions the same story is on TikTok on March 19th, 2021. This time Trisha encourages her followers to search the teacher and look up his arrest. So Trisha specifically says that this teacher has been arrested. It seems legit, right? Surely if Trisha is encouraging their audience to look this up, it would pop right up when you search it. That isn't the case at all. In fact, when you Google exactly what Trisha says, this teacher does pop up under the top results, but it isn't because he was arrested. It was because he passed away in 2019, and his obituary pops up when you Google what she says.
This observation began to garner traction in forums and comment sections, with some calling on Ethan to amend the story with mind to information available, and on the 11th of September he released a statement. This echoed much of what the concerned parties at the time were professing, that although it was not necessarily his place to discredit a survivor story, he also couldn't keep that story up in good faith knowing the elements of it simply weren't true. Now, it's completely fair to acknowledge that given how trauma affects memory and recall of certain events, it's possible that Trisha may have confused the details and names related to these accounts. However, with the previous contradictions in mind, it obviously occurred to Ethan that maybe there was the possibility that this version of events had been somewhat fabricated. And in that case, especially when dealing with criminal allegations, it's fair to err on the side of caution. Ethan had also followed up privately with Trisha, seeking clarification of these claims, with many audience members also publicly stating their desire for this to be addressed. How did they respond to this inquiry? Well, Trisha first put out a deluge of tweets defending them and Moses from those who they felt were applying pressure, and feeling threatened by Ethan's tone, the DMs decided to share the messages themselves and let people decide on who was behaving with the most decorum. And honestly, it's a dumpster fire, with everyone throwing blame at each other's feet. Ethan compels Trisha to make a public statement, and Trisha shares many posts that they believe were contributing to unnecessary harassment. Both Trisha and Ethan seem to use this accused individual's family in their narrative, Ethan in his post and Trish in the messages. It's hard to know what the family themselves want, but I'm not sure this is it. In the end, they become secondary to further allegations leveled towards Trisha's fiancé, Moses, which had been circulating recently as well. These allegations included stealthing, which, as I understand it, is the removal of the contraceptive device during sex, without the consent of the partner. Allegations also resurfaced surrounding Moses' intent to date Trisha in the first place, with some still wondering if he was just there for the money. He responded to some of these claims in a tweet longer where he asserts that the main complainant had an unhealthy obsession with him, which has subsequently warped their view, sharing DMs to supposedly substantiate this. It brings one person's motive into question, but it doesn't disprove the claims themselves, especially the ones made by others. With that said, it's hard to comment further when you don't know these people involved, and I honestly don't. However, in the DMs, Ethan expresses belief in the person leveling these accusations, and seems to imply that Trisha is being rather hypocritical in their stance. They express visible distress at the situation.
I'm pleading. I texted you, and he left. Please stop. Stop talking about this.
This was clearly having a negative impact on others as well, though, with Ethan announcing that he and Hila would be taking a week off the podcast in light of everything. The stress had just become too much for them to bear. At this point, although I think everyone was exhausted, people were by no means appeased, and remnants of the few persisted over the following weeks, with a variety of people and media sources contributing their think pieces. Much of this occurred on fan forums, but one person shared a message from someone who claimed to be a former student at Trisha's school. They attested that although the teacher in question had been dismissed from their role for possibly disreputable behavior, it wasn't related to his conduct towards the students specifically. Once again, this wasn't verified, and to be honest, it's quite hard to verify without people revealing private details, which most people aren't, but it was more food for thought. In response to Ethan's request and pressure from the public sphere, Trisha responded on the 15th of September with a video titled Addressing Everything. I'm not going to go over the details specifically, but Trisha maintains their stories, and in response to the new form narrative of their supposed lying, contends that knowingly lying is not the same as misspeaking, which is what they feel they did. They say they don't fact check and have a tendency to spew secondhand information without actually understanding it themselves. They take responsibility for that, but they don't agree with the characterizations presented by many of their critics, especially those in the forums.
There's a difference between misspeaking, hearing things and not getting all the facts right, not fact checking, and also, versus sharing something you know to not be true for the malicious intent of tricking someone or making someone look bad. And so I get stories mixed up. I hear things from people and I don't fact check, and that was ultimately why I should never have had a podcast. I should never have been on Frenemies, but I'm not the only person in the world to do that. Having said that, I have never lied about any things that have happened to me.
The truth is difficult sometimes, and sometimes we have to accept that we'll never know the truth fully. What you ultimately had was two very vehement factions, and when that arises, it can be difficult to deal with. It was certainly fostered in environments like Reddit where fans of one side tended to convene. I don't think it's completely fair to say that because someone misplaced details, that the whole story is false. But at the same time, Trisha's response still didn't implicate the criticism relating to stories where there was contradictory evidence available. In a way, no two situations are the same, and they shouldn't be treated as such, even if someone is an unreliable narrator. But when the accusations at hand were becoming so sensitive, the tensions were only flaring further. As Trisha said while defending Moses, people can lie. And the question was whether that person was Trisha. In the week after their video, Trisha removed over 1,000 videos from their channel, cleansing approximately 1 billion views of their work. And the week after, Ethan announced the start of their new collaborative project with the less controversial Hassan Piker. Less controversial.
You said America deserved 9/11. Did you mean that? No, obviously not.
With the family connection also firmly in tatters, it would be fair to assume that this would end the drama, especially with Ethan seemingly making a commitment to withdraw from discussing Trisha, and Trisha seemingly wanting the drama to be over. However, a lot of internet criticism persisted, particularly with the two sides who wanted to portray the other side as dishonest, because what we saw was a stalemate, which meant fans felt completely free to make assumptions about the characters of people they were criticizing. After being referenced in Ethan's stream, accounts dedicated to publicizing alleged inconsistencies such as contradictions of Trish on TikTok began to pick up traction, only further creating groundswell around these narratives. The account raises interesting points, though at the same time, some of these clips are a decade apart and are considerate of the fact that people's perspectives change. But we'll come to that in a moment. Besides that, there were still occasional allusions to each other's existence. With Trisha's upcoming marriage to Moses, it was hard to keep them both out of mind too much, particularly when such an event would usually bring the family together.
Well, my friends, happy birthday to Hilda. Hilda, who is pregnant, who is beautiful, who is everything. You are the everything. I love you so much, and I'm so excited to spend the weekend with you.
On December 10th, in a stream the day before Trisha's wedding, Ethan made a comment in passing that tomorrow was Hila's birthday, which would have been the 11th. However, Hila's birthday is actually on the 12th. This caused some of Trisha's fandom to claim that Ethan and Hila were lying about their birthdays, Thursday to purposely draw more hate towards Trisha, as some other fans had also been claiming that Trisha was purposely mimicking impactful dates of the clients in a continued attempt to provoke them.
Thank you, everybody.
Hope you all have a great weekend. Leftovers on Sunday.
Going over the streams, it seems that Ethan may be celebrating Hila's birthday on the Saturday, as he declares that he's recording another episode of Leftovers, the one with Handsome Biker, on the Sunday. It'd be one hell of a way to try and rile his fans up, though as shown, many audience members' perspectives were so cynical they couldn't help but theorize if every comment had an underlying meaning. It's unsure whether either party believed that the other was taking backhanded jabs at them, but this all seemed to boil over when Trisha posted a rather tone-deaf TikTok barely a few days after the wedding. I mean, tone deaf is one way to put it, but it is just ridiculous that they thought this was a good idea. I mean, it's not an active admission that it's what they did, but it's a pretty heavy inference. I can't really see any other punchline there. I'm pretty sure those dance moves don't directly relate to Judaism unless they're implying that such seductive dance moves are payment. But I have to admit I'm not familiar with that currency either. Either way, it's anti-Semitic, and Ethan, displeased with this, decided to break his vow of silence and directly address Trisha in a response.
So you say you couldn't finish your conversion classes, which tells me that you don't care enough about the culture to put in the actual work to do it the right way. And then you say that you just paid off a rabbi to just say you're Jewish, which is, first of all, a lie. No rabbi would do that. And second of all, anti-Semitic, because it just propagates the notion that Jews only care about money. And that's very serious. You know, the whole thing is just disgusting, frankly. And if you don't want me to stitch your anti-Semitic TikToks, then turn Stitch off. I don't want to hear you bitch about that. And the worst thing about all this is that there's people around you that know better.
One of these was done on TikTok, where it explains how Trisha was harmfully stereotyping those from his religion. However, clearly feeling like he had not contributed enough to the discourse, decided to dedicate a section of his off-the-rails soundbite stream to Trisha's comments. Explained that with the wedding behind them, he had no reason to hold back, attacking both Trisha, Moses, and everyone else in the blast radius. It seemed like a pretty cathartic experience for him all in all. The soundbite of Trisha's sister discussing the 5% subsequently won the bitterly fought knockout tournament, seemingly becoming immortalized in H3 history.
17,000 votes. Take that 5%. Has gained the lead. 51%. Take that 5%. It's all unfolding. It is all unfolding
that
here.
5% is going to be
21.
Take that 5%.
Oh, I'm speechless, folks.
It's clear that although he hadn't spoken about the matter publicly for a couple months, he hadn't stopped thinking about it, as he come equipped with a plethora of evidence and anecdotes to combat the narrative propounded by Trish and those around them. In fact, this is arguably his most ruthless stream of them all, showing very little regard for the backlash that he may instigate and revealing some rather personal details about Trisha.
I was on a Trisha Paytas embargo by Hila for the sake of her family attending the wedding. Well, that shit is over, and they're gone back to Israel.
That's
so
off. That's off.
I don't owe any shit to anybody. And actually, the worst part is that Moses knows better. I mean, he's fucking enabling straight up anti-Semitic, harmful tropes, making a mockery of the religion, and it's fucking disgusting. And they should both be deeply ashamed. And them both. Peace and love. By the way, this is coming.
The fact that they got family beef now. Ooh, and Trisha just had the baby. Malibu, is it Malibu Barbie? I think it's Malibu Barbie. Oh God.
From the girl who has done OF videos with her whole fucking family. So don't feign that you're so outraged by this candle story. You know, I mean, Kaylee, if you were so worried about your mom not knowing the intimate details of your sex life, don't make OF videos with her, you fucking freak. And by the way, people have dug up so many videos of Trisha and Kaylee talking with really detailed questions about sex with their mom.
Gross.
Disgusting, weird shit that I would never in a million years want to discuss. So you know what, Kaylee? That wedding is over. Fuck you and your whole family. How about that? Fuck you and the womb you came out of.
Wow.
How about that, Kaylee?
Yeah. Cool.
And once I asked Moses if...
Oh my God, I can't believe I hit the button again. We were getting to the good part with the whole family feud.
Ethan emphasized that these two were drawn together for that unique chemistry, seemingly debunking.
I drew a picture of our family. It sucks.
The idea that this was a and Ethan, displeased with this, decided to break his vow of silence and directly address Trisha in a response.
So you say you couldn't finish your conversion classes, which tells me that you don't care.
Oh, here we go. Bro, I can't believe I keep exiting out on X.
Videos of Trisha and Kaylee talking with really detailed questions about sex with their mom.
Gross.
Disgusting, weird shit that I would never in a million years want to discuss. So you know what, Kaylee? That wedding is over. Fuck you and your whole family. How about that? Fuck you and the womb you came out of.
Lee.
How about that, Kaylee?
Yeah. Okay, so I was gonna say, yeah, I understand that, what Trisha makes out like her family, it sounds kind of like a broken home, which would make sense why, you know, the family, it is what it is. Like, the Paul brothers, like, we see how weird the parents are. Like, it's definitely a broken family. And I think the way that the Pauls are the way that they are is because they basically kind of had to make all this stuff on their own because their parents, I don't know, they just don't seem like the best role models, if I were to be honest.
Cool. And once I asked Moses if she ever asked him to pretend like he's Hila, and he said yes, but he refuses to. Well, if you ask Moses, they're all water, so incest is fine. All sex is best to Moses when everyone's water. He's like, hey, it's all good, baby.
Defensive, like, why?
I deleted it after I was up, after everyone was telling me how fucking dumb of a take it was. But everybody already downloaded it. You already said it, and you tried some shit. It ain't my fucking fault. You're an influencer. Don't act like you're not. She is. She's been on the videos. She has her own OF account. She's an internet personality. I don't give a. Got 5% of an operating brain. Oh boy. I was bottled up. What can I do, you know?
Ethan isn't a person who necessarily abides by the internet's code of honor all the time. And whereas the milder individuals who spectate this may find its savagery a bit disconcerting, Ethan seems to be under the impression that this is his justice. For all the times he has felt wronged by Trisha's behavior, their lies, their manipulation, this was his chance to deliver that blow. However, Trisha obviously didn't respond well, releasing a video pleading with him to leave her alone, calling both Ethan and Hila obsessed, and basically every other word under the sun that would frame them as a victim to the client's endless tirade of abuse.
Every little jab, every video he's made obsessing about me, it always scares me. The backlash I receive from their subreddit and their fans, to Ethan himself just obsessing over every little thing I do. Meanwhile, Ethan can't stop talking about me, can't stop getting bans and strikes going off on Twitter on just random people blocking his content and just being so angry. And lawsuits and all this stuff like that. And I get he's probably himself in a dark place right now. Like, I really could see that. I was like, I know he's in a dark place, so okay, I'll take a couple jabs. But this F them and anti-Semitic and Moses enabling, talking about Moses, talking about my sister, people who literally did nothing in this situation. And bringing up my sister again, just knowing he's inciting all of this. I went from having the absolute best weekend of my life to this, and everyone, my family, and Moses, and oh, he wants a reaction. Don't let him get this reaction. And I'm like, don't let him know that he ruined your best weekend. I said, but he did. He won. Like, can you stop now? Please. Like, please.
In this case, unlike previous videos, Ethan relented and cut out a large proportion of his Trisha rant. It's also important to note that Ethan was facing a pretty harsh set of characterizations from an individual known as Ryan Kavanaugh, who had initiated a lawsuit against the client. His lawsuit mentions Trisha by name and frames them as a victim of Ethan's actions. Ethan had been vocal about the stress this lawsuit had caused him and may have not wanted to increase any risk of defeat, given that the case explicitly mentions defamation on multiple occasions. Ryan had also been blocking many of Ethan's videos, which he had tweeted about around the time, and not too long after, he was again blocked from uploading after an old video was supposedly mass-reported by trolls. Once more, Ethan announced that he would take another break, even after having the strike removed. It seemed that his attempt to close out this story was opening more new wounds. But why? Well, because there's no situation with Trisha in which you can win. If the contradictions of Trish TikTok accounts and other commentators highlighted something, it's that Trisha is probably the most inconsistent person online. Now, I divide these inconsistencies into three components: personal evolution, small talk disparities, and inexplicable lies. For example,
people asking about nanny and a bar mitzvah, you know, it's hard to say. It's like hard to say until it happens. Like, I would like to try, obviously, without a nanny. I really don't judge anyone that has them. When I have a kid, I'm not gonna have nannies, that's pretty, I'm sure.
What does that mean? You're trying to attack our parental abilities? There's something wrong with having a nanny?
In my eyes, yes.
This one isn't really a direct contradiction, especially with the context that at the time they were trying to spite Ethan. It could just be Trisha coming around to the idea of a nanny and the possible merits to it, especially as they are now pregnant. Small talk disparity, on the other hand, doesn't really show much growth between conflicting statements, but also could be explained away by the fact that Trisha is someone who talks a lot, and their opinions seem to fluctuate rather turbulently, but also ultimately too inconsequential to care about. The content people seemed most alarmed by was the inexplicable lies, statements that seemed impossible to make sense of in the context of how the truth appeared.
My dog was because of David and Jason. They just surprised me with it for a vlog and made me keep it, even though I never asked for a dog. And yes, we did talk about this. Everyone was like, oh my god, you can't just surprise me with a puppy. I've been wanting a puppy for a really long time. We had talked about it for a while, that I wanted a Pomeranian, that my mom would help me take care of it.
Just to be clear, we did talk about this, and the plan was to maybe give the dog to Trisha's mom, who really wants Pomeranian.
This was first brought into context by the puppy clip, and although certain falsehoods like the allegations against a school teacher could be put down to confusion, others like that relating to the puppy are much harder to explain. Where's the ambiguity there? Trisha said something that was just apparently objectively false, and that's far from the only example. I said earlier that Trisha was most at ease when firing off information and stories about topics that interest them. That was when the podcast ran at its smoothest, but it was only because it was what made viewers and colleagues feel most comfortable.
I don't even know what this is. Like, I can't even like cosplay because I don't know what it is.
Oh my god, this is one of my all-time favorite moves. movies.
You got it off Reddit and you're like, we're gonna do this, and I'm like, I don't like. This is definitely not my idea.
You told me you didn't like it? What? Can we? I love her.
It's confusing and hard to really understand because you're often left thinking, why would you even need to lie about something as trivial as that? But it's very difficult to come to any other conclusion than that this was intentional. But then the question comes down to what motive causes a person to state inaccuracies like Trisha does. Not just about one detail or the other, but in general. Well, a simple response would be that Trisha is a troll, and they've been trolling long throughout their YouTube career. On one hand, yes, this is true. Trisha has been a notorious troll since the early days of this platform. But on the other hand, it seemed that trolling was a bit more identifiable, particularly in the narratives and the tone. It was also something that Trisha claimed to have left behind them on a fair few occasions when discussing it.
So when people said no, then I did troll and make a video where I started going into altars if that's what people wanted to see. But it was clearly a troll. People were upset that I, did that. And I get it. I get the upset with that. But that made it triggered from people being like, you don't have this, you don't have this. Meanwhile, everyone's saying you're crazy, you have this, you have everyone diagnosing me. It's like, well,
when you make a video like that or the trans video or whatever, you get a lot of attention. You're an attention seeker, but you usually get a lot of negative attention. Do you see a difference between negative and positive attention?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's like my trans video and my DID video were never to be negative. They were never to get negative attention. And I got my last one where I willingly seeked out negative attention was like when Trump ran the first time. I was like, hey, I'm a Trump supporter. I'm not. And I loved getting negative attention back then. That was when 4 years ago. So it was like I haven't done a negative attention seeking video since.
This was not just a relationship that enabled Trisha to post a few videos. This was a fully fledged business partnership that generated significant income for our prima donna. It precipitated a romantic bond that produced a marriage and a pregnancy. For all that to be a troll would require some mastermind level preparation and emotional robustness that even Trisha, in all their longevity and fortitude, may not be capable of. What's the alternative explanation then? Well, I think the idea of Trisha being a troll is reductionist. A troll is known to actively carry out undesirable actions for attention. And although Trisha has done that, they're not just a lover of negative attention. Trisha has a way of inserting themselves into stories that makes them relevant to the situation at hand. I think if any of the perceived contradictions highlight a common factor, these are often situations where the people who Trisha may be commenting on are unlikely to respond on a public platform in a way that may illuminate these lies, either because they're embroiled in drama that contains valid criticisms, so they struggle to respond in general, or they literally can't respond. Trisha's stories always seem to be rooted in some grain of truth, but it's hard to know exactly what followed.
I didn't want to tweet because I actually knew him, and I'm not saying like, oh my god, we were like best friends, but I hung out with him at least a dozen times when I was younger, like 19 to 20, and I won't really say how we knew each other, our relationship, just out of kind of respect for him or his family. I know, you know what I mean? I don't feel like I need to air out dirty laundry or any drama.
One of the curious stories Trisha told back in the day was about an interaction with famous actor Robin Williams, who passed on from this world far too soon. Trisha stated that when they worked as a courtesan, their paths had crossed. This story was recounted on their channel not too long after Robin's passing, and repeated on the podcast, where Trisha brings it up and then seems hesitant to elaborate further.
I knew Robin Williams.
Let me guess, you fucked him. I don't like
talking about now that he's deceased, but I did do a story time on one time, and he was really, really nice. But I don't like go into detail how I know, but he was really nice, and he did.
Wait, how do you know him?
I don't know.
You better tell me now.
No.
So you were a prostitute and you hooked up with Robin?
It was like a
well,
long
he's known for doing that stuff.
Yeah, but he was really like again.
Was he a good lover?
He was really nice. I don't want to talk about it. It's just really so disrespectful. I don't want him to like roll it.
You think he'll haunt you? That's flubber.
Now, once again, with the legacy of Robin Williams and the awareness that we have of his often complicated and problematic character, it's not in the realms of impossibility. At the same time, it's another situation which involves an admittedly rather unlikely scenario with only one available source. This is the case with a fair few other public figures and even private ones. Although in many cases these stories are mostly inconsequential, the discomfort from Ethan's perspective was that he believed he was used to prop up a false portrait of someone, and it's not hard to see why. It's important not to understate the more sophisticated aspect relating to Trisha's understanding of internet culture. Trisha isn't someone who just exists to lie. They have desires and aspirations. I think in this case, the podcast provides a platform for Trisha to tell a new story that would contextualize their behavior, that would almost be this new chapter in their life. Trisha knows what to do to maximize their attention. And although in the past the best way to do this was through often shallow provocation, here it was actually to create a deeper, more sympathetic portrait, one that would make them look more human and have the audience rooting for them. Many people would have that naturally within their character. With Trisha, it's like another persona for each moment. Trisha's nature to adapt to situations and bring themselves to the forefront of conversation is so prominent that they couldn't help but misrepresent certain situations, while spectators looked on and nodded their heads. When Trisha was caught up in lies before, in their first appearance on the H3 podcast, when the lies were quite obvious, people didn't feel so threatened by them. But as people bought into the greater story in its entirety, the impact clearly affected people more significantly. While the podcast was running smoothly, everything went well for them. Their platform was used, and it's clear that many began to fall in love with the Trisha they thought they were becoming familiar with. And because they deemed Trisha a likable individual, very few questioned these stories. I don't know Trisha inside out to say without a shadow of a doubt they actively, intently lied. But they did not tell the truth. And in the months following, it was clear that Ethan grew bitter, believing that he had been duped into providing a platform for someone to speak so carelessly and using his trust to provide an extra veneer of credibility. But that's only one perspective. What's the other? How much blame can we assign to Trisha, and how much can we assign elsewhere?
Okay, we're almost done. Oh my god. It feels forever.
By the way, and people have dug up so many videos of Trisha and Kaylee talking with like really detailed questions about sex with their mom. Gross. Like disgusting, weird shit that I would never in a million years want to discuss. So you know what, Kaylee? That wedding is over. Fuck you and your whole family. How about that?
In the coming months after their pre-Christmas spat, although Ethan and Hila had mostly cleaned up their legal obligations relating to Ryan Kavanaugh, the release of certain pressures didn't draw them back to the topic of Trisha, other than a few subtweets. Likely because Ethan going full mask off wasn't actually a rewarding experience. Trisha did what many expect and put Ethan in a position where if he said any more, he'd be the aggressor. He'd be the one unduly ruining a person's honeymoon. Yet, many were still frustrated, pointing towards all the times that Trisha had spoken endlessly about frenemies after they broke up. But unfortunately, they're not quite the same, are they? One is Ethan, and one is Trisha. Many of the accounts that we've used today, and many of the people who've taken to call Trisha out for their behaviour during Frenemies, were completely on board only months before, despite the fact that many of Trisha's comments were firstly made on Frenemies and made long before Frenemies, statements that were well known and acknowledged at the time. In many ways, Trisha's demeanour always straddled the line of trolling master seriousness, and people expressing outrage at this shouldn't necessarily be that surprised. Trisha did exactly what they normally do. Isn't this what we expected to happen anyway? In Trisha's first collaboration with the Kleins, they were called out for specifically lying about a rather important detail relating to drama. Surely it was obvious that this was a pattern.
This channel called Psych in Real Life, they did how Frenemies reveals a mental health misconception perpetuated by the internet. This was a really good one. This was someone who was like in our favor. Some people are in our favor that we show the ugly side of BPT. They're like, you know what? Everyone's a mental health advocate until it's ugly. And
So another theory began to arise, and although I don't think it's the most popular one, I think it's worth addressing nonetheless, particularly given the undercurrents of mental health. As discussed earlier, May felt that given Trisha's noted instability, responsibility ultimately fell on Ethan for platforming them in the first place. One of the initial appeals of Frenemies was that Trisha Paytas was such an interesting character, and that they often lacked a filter and would say stuff that people do deem offensive. Trisha never deviated from how they were known to behave, so why was it fair to treat them any other way? I think the problem is that this ultimately arose from the desire to keep the podcast together, friendly bias, and some of Dr. Drew's less helpful advice. Ethan did obviously treat Trisha differently when they were a part of the podcast. Although he was no pushover, he didn't really treat Trisha's worst comments with the seriousness that they could have been treated as a critic or even as a friend. And some would even say that he almost left people to observe it like a specimen under a microscope. It was part of the theatre. It could easily blur the lines between melodrama and serious disputes. In the months after, it became easy to view what seemed like melodrama at the time in a much more serious light, and many did, but losing perspective of the original context they were viewed in. Exposing Trisha Paytas is such a strange concept because everyone knows so much and so little about them at the same time, and I don't know what you could say about Trisha Paytas that would surprise me. I spoke earlier about Ethan's bias, and I think it's what's made him a contentious figure. During the Keemstar girlfriend drama, a clip began to circulate of what he said to Boogie, another creator on the older side who'd had an interaction with a younger girl, and Ethan's supposedly differing perspective.
She's a strong, powerful, smart girl. For her age,
Strong,
I was
independent.
shocked.
How old is she? How old is she?
She will be able to legally drink soon.
Damn, you dog, dude.
Yeah, it was bad, man.
It's not bad. She's illegal. You're out there. You're shaking your dick.
Don't try and find out who the girl is. Don't try and do
the
anything.
girl is not to blame for anything.
Yeah.
She's only 20 years old. She's a child.
Yes.
We love. I mean, well, I don't know anything about her, but I'm not going after her at all. I'm never going to criticize her or say anything bad about her. This is just about a 39-year-old creep.
Now, this once again harkens back to the hypocrisy narrative that many assert. However, I think it more shows how often Ethan projects his judgment of character onto an action that many others may refrain from making assumptions about.
Yeah, like,
Ethan believes that
Ethan and Hassan, like I said, they talk about not being that critical to people they're friends with, but when it comes to people they don't like, don't agree with, they do everything they can to talk down on them. Because honestly, Kimi, not the best person. I mean, he still acts cringe. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. And the way he was like, all mental health doesn't exist, and the way he treated the whole Etika situation is a huge L. Like, I don't think he could ever come from that. But Ethan, like, especially with the whole situation with Deaf Noodles, like, Ethan would be eating, you know, Deaf Noodles alive. But since Deaf Noodles, you know, is his lapdog, he decides not to do so. So it's just something that rubbed me the wrong way.
Keemstar is an inherently opportunistic, shady individual, probably many worse words. And therefore, from Ethan's perspective, Keem's attraction to younger adults is based on something more insidious than if it was an action carried out by someone he had more respect for. The only issue is that Ethan often doesn't elaborate on this himself and uses general logic that could be applied to any of these situations. And therefore, the people who don't think it's fair to cross-apply those assumptions, these positions, will seem conflicting. I think the Trisha fallout showed that friend-enemy dichotomy that Ethan clearly experienced. And in a way, it makes sense. Someone who you may perceive charitably may have their faux pas viewed as requiring education. However, if you come to the conclusion that actually that person is not well-meaning, then you may think that they already have the education, they're just discarding it. With that said, it is a distinct polarity. And although some would say that Trisha certainly poked Ethan until he bit back, others would argue he unquestionably gave a platform for
Yeah, honestly, I think what made Frenemies so different is, like, it's in the name, you know, like, they disagree and agreeing on a lot of things, and that basically just brought out, like, a different side of them both, if I were to be honest with you.
a person who was known for their falsehoods and then adopted a victimhood narrative when those falsehoods were turned against him. It's not hard to wonder if the famous episode 17 would have even been considered for deletion if Frenemies never split up. As we've seen, it's very difficult to use Trisha's words against them because you don't know what's real and what isn't. The truth is, no viewer or audience member will ever truly know who Trisha Paytas is or what they believe because they throw out so many statements that makes me question if they know what they believe themselves half the time. With this in mind, I think some commentators and critics of Klein, their fanbase, found the long-term reaction to the collapse of Frenemies slightly inauthentic. Trisha had alluded to this narrative as well, regularly claiming people only cared about certain actions after they were antagonized by the audience. And although somewhat inaccurate, I can understand the gist of it. In essence, they're saying people like Ethan only wanted the drama, only wanted the controversy, only wanted the tea and the hot takes as long as Trisha was part of the podcast. Ethan isn't stupid, and he's very outspoken about people he doesn't like and thinks should probably be deplatformed for their behavior, such as Keemstar. Although these two did one episode actually a very long time ago, Ethan has repeatedly refused to share a platform with him since, citing Keem's behavior as examples for why. Some would argue that much of the stuff that Trish had done prior to the podcast was no less concerning, yet they were still taken on. How come?
I think the problem that you have is that you are impulsive, and so you go and make videos without thinking about it, and then people start to disbelieve you, and they think you're like this drama machine, and that you make these videos intentionally. And so, like, I get why he would think that. You know what I mean? Because it's like every week, you know, it's like I'm transgender, I have personality disorder, and so people start to think like, what is really going on here?
I get it. I'm not mad about it, but Anthony Padilla, of all people, Mr. fucking woke, if there's something wrong with someone, which there clearly is, let's say I am, let's say I have a pathological liar and there's some fucking disorder where I'm just like always needing attention, like I have something wrong with me. You don't fucking attack someone because something's wrong. How about get that person fucking help? How about butt out because there's probably other people helping? People don't know fucking.
The thing is, we try to get her help, but she gaslights, and it's just like a endless cycle. Like, she tries to play the victim. They try to give her criticism, and understand where she's coming from, but she uses it as a defense mechanism to not face any, you know, responsibilities. And I don't think she's ever gonna, because she would have been canceled a long time ago, and we know that she's immune to that.
Shit when it comes to this stuff.
Well, I suppose more cynical viewers would assume that once again it comes down in part to control. Unlike a collaboration with Keemstar, for example, Ethan had an idea of how podcasts with Trisha could go. He had relative control of it on his platform, and at the time there was a notion that greater evil for both parties to combat. Trisha did what Trisha was brought on to do, and people catered to them and supported them. And although there were conflicts, they were regularly brought back not too long after with the expectation that if Trisha could be kept happy, the podcast would continue. Some might even say that Trisha's behavior was enabled by an environment that valued their presence over the actual truth, despite the fact that this contradictory evidence was available during many of the discussions they held. Trisha is an autonomous adult and therefore has to bear some responsibilities for their statements. However, if their inconsistency has been as consistent as it's made out to be, some would claim Ethan isn't as innocent as people might assume, that he must have had some awareness of what he signed himself up for, but didn't mind as long as he had control of the environment that Trisha existed in, as long as the narrative was on his side.
I do have a premonition that I feel like I'm going to be like a Jimmy Fallon, and I'm going to just have to leave the show, and I feel bad because you're so nice to me.
You're going to move up. You're going to ascend to late night and say, Ethan, I'm sorry. We've had a good thing, but I have to leave you behind.
Eventually, we're going to have to part ways, and when is that going to happen, and what's going to happen? Like, I'll feel bad if that's you. Like, what if, you know what I mean?
I'm pretty content. I'm not looking to move up anywhere. I feel like
that's the problem with me. I'm never content. I always think I'm going to be doing better and bigger things.
Some would always believe that Ethan just wanted to use Trisha's controversial persona for the clickbait and the views, without real regard for the place that Trisha's inconsistencies and outbursts came from. And although Trisha did consent, was Trisha too in love with the attention to even process the situation rationally? Was it really responsible to provide them with that space anyway? Maybe Ethan only wanted Trisha for as long as they played the part they wanted, and the moment they attempted to take more control was the moment they were no longer useful. This is all just speculation, and a reflection of how people view the situation quite cynically. And I want to make that clear. But it often did latch on to one key factor of the podcast, particularly one with such notable personalities, and that is control. So what did that control come down to? Well, one statistic springs to mind.
We bought a studio downtown. That was always the plan, by the way, that we were going to move up downtown. And then all of a sudden, I was like, yo, and I was like, yo, we're moving. I told you ahead of time, but it's fine because
you didn't tell me downtown
we're still
LA.
at my house now. But I said, okay, so I was like, yo, by the way, we moved into our new office. We're going to be there next week. And then you're like, oh, I don't want to go down there. And but we had made all these plans to move the set and everything and to do everything. So you're like, I don't want to go down there. And then we talked about it for a little bit. And I said, okay, fine. And so we had to buy.
But that was the first time we ever spent money on production costs.
It's not about that, dude. It's literally about we are producing the show and I'm taking a cut. I feel like that's beyond reasonable.
All
beyond
the highlights.
Reasonable.
5%. 5%. Do you realize how much 5% was of our last one?
Ay, ay, ay.
Underground real shit.
As said, it's very hard to distinguish Trisha's true beliefs from the ones they push for provocative purposes. There was one situation which I do feel represented Trisha's opinions from a fairly genuine perspective, as it was one where their behaviour didn't benefit this arc of attention. That is arguably the most memed issue of it all, the 5% and what it represented. Although Trisha is a person who often isn't completely honest with what they think or how they feel, it's never without a greater motive. And in absence of a trolling motive, we have to ask ourselves, what is so important about 5%?
Well, in her whole family. It's like they're all just sitting there counting the 5%. Like,
He takes that 5%.
You got her whole family. You're just like the 5%. 5? That's a small number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 100. It's 100 numbers. There's 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it.
Now, the quotes and jokes run deep, and rightfully so. I don't think there's anyone who believes that with the production cost, Trisha and Ethan's profit should have been split completely evenly. However, I do think the banter has often clouded the core points that were trying to be made, that weren't completely unfounded. It also reflects the ultimate flaw in the structure of Frenemies and the dynamic between Ethan and Trisha. Both parties report a sense of betrayal when discussing the capitulation of the partnership, that they both gave a lot to be on the podcast before being thrown under the bus by the other. And maybe this was because that in later episodes they seemed to become much more comfortable with each other. Trisha was invited on the podcast by Ethan, with Ethan owning all the production resources and investing in it himself. Therefore, although it was hosted by both of them, there was the steadying hand of Ethan to keep the show afloat under all circumstances, which made sense given Trisha's unpredictable tendencies. However, it also meant that Trisha was almost always a guest on their own podcast. Although their outbursts often resulted in certain concessions, it also reminded people that their presence was still unreliable, and didn't give them any stead to expect more control over production. However, 35 episodes in and half a year since the last serious quarrel, I think Trisha believed that they had become enough of a mainstay to expect a bit more authority over the direction of the podcast.
The girl that he cheated on with, this Ava Louise girl, he called her a gremlin. It's like, you fucked her.
Go off,
You can't.
queen.
I hate
Go the
guys,
fuck off.
guys fuck girls, and because they got caught or whatever, then they call the girl the gremlin, stuff like that. Like, oh, she was good enough to suck your dick. Like, what are you? Mike is such a woman hater, and he hates sex workers. And, you can see this by Lana. He's cheated on her. He's like publicly admitted to it in a game, saying he got head from people. Like, he's so this is the kind of guy that in virtual reality has to get head from somebody over in fucking Florida or wherever the fuck they are, and thinking that's cool. Like, oh yeah, baby, like you are such a loser. You
fucked up, Mike.
Perfect example of small dick energy that you need a virtual person to suck your dick. You psychopath.
It's no secret that they read the comments, and reception had really turned in the prior months. One issue remained though: how are they to bring up this point of discourse? Well, Trisha has a way of not bringing up specifically what they want, rather pushing discussion in a direction that will eventually result in their desirable proposition. In that final episode, it was a problem that clearly bothered them, which is why they attacked the production aspect, eventually escalating the situation to the point where the episode ended prematurely. However, the 5% narrative in my mind was Trisha's logical entry point to this discussion, and a clear signifier of what they wanted. Basically, Trisha's point was that, as it wasn't 50-50 exactly, because that 5% came from their own share, they deserve more influence in the decisions being made. Ultimately, I disagree with this specific line of logic, and I think you have to look more at the share from the perspective that this 5% was nobody's money to begin with. However, I also think there was a case to be made for Trisha to have more of a say in certain decisions regardless of the money, because Frenemies was presented as a joint project, and they were part of the appeal. But that discussion didn't happen because of how Trisha subsequently handled it. Now, the tinfoil hat guy in me would question how much of Trisha's outburst was calculated, and I really can't say for certain in that case. However, I would go as far to say that I think their announcement to step down was done with almost the opposite intent. With people's desire to keep the podcast together and the result of previous tantrums, Trisha had every reason to believe that actually them standing down would prompt Ethan to do everything he could to keep the podcast together, possibly having another Dr. Drew episode which results in Drew recommending Trisha has more representation on the podcast, and Ethan abiding by the expert advice. However, that did not happen. The 5%, as amusing as it was, became that primary narrative to show that from Trisha's perspective, they never really had any control. And for a podcast that they featured on, in their eyes, that wasn't fair. In my opinion, Trisha didn't want the extra 5%, they just wanted what it represented. In the videos following the collapse of the podcast, Trisha emphasized that from their perspective, their input wasn't valued enough. And although certain points they made were contradicted pretty directly, once again bringing that intent into question, I do think there was a tension that neither of them wanted to address until after they didn't have an obligation to each other. Both Trisha and Ethan sought to emphasize how much they cared about each other, and I don't doubt that's true, but I guess the question would be, how much did they trust each other? One clip from Ethan's video in particular seems quite relevant.
So she wants me to hire people, lease an industrial space, of which, by the way, the leases are usually 3+ years on industrial spaces, for something that she's inevitably going to quit. Like, I mean, it's happened 3 times already, so like, and guess who's going to take all the risk on that? Me. I'm going to risk my ass.
Here he states he didn't want to hand over more authority to Trisha in the say at the start because from his perspective, he was the anchor, and Trisha could walk out at any time without experiencing any repercussions. This is true, but in a way, he walks himself into cyclical reasoning because what he says is only true because Trisha walked out because of that specific reason, in which case Trisha would just reply, well, that's where the 5% of my cut comes in. Now, as said, I don't necessarily agree with Trisha that a cut should give them a stronger say, necessarily. I think it's much more to do with trust, but in this case, all you do is prove that you ultimately didn't trust them, and you can turn around and say, well, they walked out, which proves that I shouldn't have given them a greater input anyway, but if they walked out on the basis of that specific issue, then it doesn't really prove your point, because Trisha would continuously push the idea that they were prepared to take more responsibility and that Klein would not grant them that. That was the significance of the 5% in their minds. As noted earlier, there were some who found Trisha's nature to compare themselves with Ela Klein concerning, some even going as far to suggest that Trisha was concealing feelings for Ethan themselves. I wouldn't say that, but what I would say is that Ethan and Ela were able to launch the H3 podcast with the mutual trust that a married couple would invest in themselves. I think Trisha wanted that feeling of partnership as well. They wanted that even split, even leadership, even management, even power. Ultimately, though, deep down they knew that wasn't something that Ethan would ever be prepared to provide, and that just...
Yeah, like, oh man, entertainment, when you involve your spouse and everything, you're bound to like get into like some uncomfortable, situations.
Expose those doubts once more and how they interpreted them. The core disagreement was this. Trisha clearly believed that Frenemies had outgrown the platform of H3 and that it ultimately needed its own space to blossom. This was a discussion that needed to be had openly and honestly. Instead, it came down to one number. That number wasn't important as a singular statistic, but more for what it meant to Trisha. The fact that there would always be that difference between them, that neither party was completely ready to trust the other. Neither quite possessed that faith.
Oh, it's KB Lane. Yeah.
This is a serious message to everybody watching my update right now. Peace and love. Peace and love.
Again, with peace and love, and I mean this with peace and love. Peace and love. With peace and love. Peace and love. Can you soundbite? I'm warning you with peace and love.
Peace and love. It's a phrase you heard a lot on the H3 podcast and Frenemies. It was first said by Ringo Starr, who quickly garnered meme status on the H3 podcast. At first, it merely held meme status, but eventually it evolved into something greater.
Just don't eat the crust. Why are you hating on the end?
I think it's a way to keep skinny. Dolly Parton once said she only eats the first bite and had the black
with peace
bite.
and love, it's not working. I mean, I'm just
I
saying.
have lost 3 pounds this week. Thank you very much. And guess what? I don't eat the last bite.
I mean,
With peace and love, it's not working for you either. Whatever you're doing, and you're working out. I'm not even working out, and I'm skinnier than you. Let's go on the scale right now.
I'm not calling you fat. I'm just saying you.
Over time, peace and love became a way to contextualize or mitigate a possible disparaging remark or negative statement in good faith. Although not a method I would typically employ, I understand that some, especially Trisha, may have found that reassuring. The problem is that eventually it begins to tire as technique, particularly when sometimes it feels difficult to fully present something as coming from a place of peace and love.
And so I say with peace and love that, as a friend, I have come to love and appreciate Trisha.
It's hard to do that when reflecting on a falling out publicly. And Trisha immediately uploading videos, tweets, and everything under the sun about how they felt placed everyone else on the back foot. Ethan was completely in his right to respond. Although it was a solid response in many ways, there was also a sense of vexation at the fact that he had tolerated so much of Trisha's behavior this time round, and yet still ended up in the same position. The problem is that when you have that building up, your narrative begins to spiral into that cynical perception of a person's actions. Take the issue of Trisha wanting to fire the crew.
Is that I was talking to the crew like, Trisha wants to, I was like, listen, Trisha wants to hire a new crew.
Now, as noted, Trisha did not say this directly, but I can understand why you'd seem to think that they are implying it. Ethan admits he handled this situation incorrectly by paraphrasing Trisha's comments to the crew. However, he doesn't actually walk back the notion of Trisha wanting to fire the crew, in fact continuing to mention it throughout the video, even stating that Trisha had directly said they wanted to fire the crew.
If anyone was upset, it's because she said that she wanted to fire everybody and get a new staff. That made people uncomfortable. The reason they were upset, that I misunderstood, is because she said she wanted to fire them all.
Now, Ethan is completely entitled to his interpretation of Trisha's comments, and Trisha hadn't done themselves any favors in the previous days. Once again, it exuded a lack of faith in Trisha's intent. Although Trisha had been unnecessarily rude about the crew, they hadn't explicitly stated that they wanted them fired, and continuing to assert this interpretation cements your stance that you believe that their expression of these feelings didn't come from a genuine place. Some may say, well, he only has this interpretation because of how Trisha had been in the previous days. But he asserts that this was his understanding before Frenemies had disbanded. The wording of firing is also going to be quite evocative because it often implies that people are going to be losing their jobs. However, in this case, as Ethan notes himself, these are people who work other jobs for the podcast, and therefore it was unlikely that this would be the case.
How did you hire Sam without consulting me? It's like, I'm sorry, this is our business. She's not just working on Frenemies. Why do I need to consult you who I hire for my business?
I don't think his point is completely invalid, but I think it conveys a restrained bitterness that was never spoken about while the podcast felt redeemable, which then skews the perspective of that specific case and obviously causes more subsequent anger from Trisha in their responses.
He's bringing up fighting the whole crew list again.
We fronted the money.
In what world? You have all these receipts. Show the fucking receipts, Ethan.
Now, I think its presentation is clearly clouded by Ethan's own feelings about the situation, but I do think it does represent that sort of thing that a peace and love tone cannot offset. And although I think he had decent grounds to believe that Trisha may have been hinting at hiring a new crew for the podcast, I think his representation just showed he hadn't progressed his opinion of Trisha as much as the viewers thought he had. It was clear that he still harbored great doubts. Trisha was no different either. Even though they opened their video expressing love for Ethan, that soon dissipated.
It's interesting. He'll show all the DMs except the ones where I say fire the crew or what he said to me the night of things that happened in the order it happened.
Trisha's video is not the easiest to follow because it's Trisha, but even amongst the numerous anecdotes they can fire off, you can tell that these are evident problems, and they've been evident problems for the longest time. The whole leaving Frenemies situation in itself was a good example, but in all honesty, if you just watch back the episodes, there are so many moments where they clearly express hesitancy to accept support or the peace and love vibe, likely because they weren't entirely happy with the podcast as it was.
Well, maybe because I always think that I'm on the defense with you when you were actually on my side. And
I'm always on your side. Always. I had no idea that so many people would like it.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you for doing the show. And I think you are so funny and talented, and you make the show so great.
As noted, I personally find it difficult to write off the idea that Trisha's departure was actually a stunt, intended to result in further negotiations for an issue they viewed as present. But if anything, they proved that they didn't believe that being honest with Ethan would actually bring about the desired result. Instead of patiently talking it out, they believed they had to generate negative attention because they believed that was what Ethan would respond to. They didn't trust Ethan, Ethan didn't trust Trisha, and they both clearly had issues but didn't have that open discussion because they thought holding it back would prevent more harm.
No matter what anyone says, and I don't care if it sounds cocky, I don't care if people like your channel shit. It doesn't matter. Like I've seen the stats. Like I've helped like subscribers go over to H3. I see comments and say Trisha bought me here, but I'm staying for Ethan. Like, you know, if it was on my channel, I would have gotten their audience to come find mine. You know, if we would have hosted it on mine.
In actuality, this only yields further frustration because then the other person has to consider the fact that you never really trusted them as a friend and that they were just tolerating your presence for the maintenance of a business partnership. It embellishes an already present rift. And Trisha was the worst person to experience that because they often seem to seek justification for why people hated them, which inevitably implanted the narrative that they were only used for views. This then spirals and only furthers the bad faith interpretation they have of each other. In the remainder of 2021, we saw attempts from both sides to really twist the knife in because they believed it was the only justified response when the other willfully tried to hurt them, far from that peace and love we'd seen before. A 40-down philosophy can only work as much as it's what a person positively responds to. And to be honest, sometimes I think Trisha needed more than peace and love, or at least they required a tougher version of it. It often represented the eggshells that Ethan felt like he walked on, something that Trisha specifically said they didn't want in messages and later videos. However, if it wasn't what they wanted, why did they support it when it was first mentioned by the expert himself?
Cool, you know, sort of.
Yeah, we're on camera.
So you're trying to make a show, and you want to not trigger her so much, but you have to get used to de-escalating things. And that's
I don't know how to de-escalate when she goes into.
Stop pushing. So then anything that was a jab, why don't you just be like, next topic, instead of, oh, so tell me why I'm a bad parent. Tell me why my mom should be watching my kids. Like, you just kept going for it, and I mean,
listen,
it.
You have to learn where that line is. You have to really learn it and just stop. You have to just go, okay.
What Trisha and Ethan really needed was some private sessions to talk about what frustrated them with a paid professional to make sure these problems didn't boil over. And instead, what they received was this.
You are allowing the wedge to be put into place.
And the podcast suffered for it. There's one video that I've refrained from talking about yet, because it may just be the worst of them all. During the era where Trisha was attempting to talk about frenemies without doing it on their own channel, they went onto a podcast with many people. One of these people, though, was Dr. Drew, the former mediating party of previous therapy episodes. In this video, when discussing the demise of frenemies, Drew continues to repeat previous narratives that he had imparted so helpfully during his appearances on the defunct podcast in question, just with more confidence now that the two had actually parted. It's really strange watching the man who was meant to help resolve it almost play into it and the questionable narratives at hand. In a way, I don't think Dr. Drew's core advice is of no use. The problem is that he takes a lot of what Trisha says at face value, and that ultimately nullifies a lot of his conclusions.
I was repeating them to him to help him understand them and try to frame his response to them, because he's not with the one struggling, although he's in the thing with you. He was evoked by what was going on with you.
I've already delivered a fair few criticisms of Dr. Drew, but I think with the full context of the face of the podcast, we can now see the ramifications of clumsily handled relationship advice by fully understanding the actual problems that Trisha and Ethan seem to perceive.
The truth is that I'm very grateful for the experience we've had with Frenemies and all the learning and growing and developing and the amazing growth that our channel's seen as the result of that show. I mean, it's been popular and successful beyond what either of us anticipated.
Trisha wanted to transform the podcast. Both they and Klein acknowledged its astounding success and view count in comparison to similar series on the channel. Frenemies clearly had a presence and an audience of its own, and Trisha's interpretation to me seemed almost like a child, wondering how long they would have to behave before Klein entrusted more responsibility onto them. But Klein didn't want to move on that because he didn't want to rely on someone who may not stick around. Why is that? Well, Ethan still didn't trust Trisha enough. Ethan couldn't predict what Trisha would do and wasn't prepared to put that faith in his own judgment alone, and that was something that should have been at least worked on during the two pivotal episodes with Dr. Drew. In a perfect world, counseling would enable both parties to find closure, yet acceptance in the differences they hold. This doesn't always happen, and for two people as diametrically opposed as Ethan and Trisha, maybe that could never happen. However, the insight they received was probably the least helpful it could be. It created this norm where problems were swept under the rug in the hope that ultimately the strength of the podcast would prevail. But tensions boil over, and bottling up problems will eventually break bonds down. There were eggshells that everyone was walking on, too afraid to address them.
That's with Ethan. I mean, from the beginning, we've always been combative, as opposed to like you. I know you're always Team Trish, as opposed to like, again, it's fine, but like, I know it was like to exploit me, right? He wanted me to walk off that set that day, so my attitude's different, which is fine. I exploit myself. Like I said, that's my like one entertaining quality for the internet, so I was like, fine, that's fine. But it's like, I knew that going into it, that he was always trying to like do another walk off, you know what I mean? So it's a little different as opposed to you.
In many ways, it told Ethan to essentially seek appeasement for the sake of the podcast longevity. Repression isn't resolution, though, and if you have these apprehensions that persist, you should talk about them, even if Trisha may find it upsetting or offensive in the moment. In this case, longevity itself is still temporary because eventually these things break down, because eventually you lose your patience or the other person picks up on the fact that you're still unsure of where you stand with them and begins to unravel themselves in an attempt to change that. That rollover mentality, it showed itself as demonstrably detrimental when Trish was trying to assert those worst expectations in that final episode, because Ethan just went ahead and confirmed it to try and end the argument, to try and move on. But sometimes people don't move on until they've cleared something up, until they've repaired that trust.
Thank you for giving me a third wave. I feel like I've gone through. Shane gave me the first wave, then David, then we don't falling out.
Well, we almost did, but we pulled through. You're marrying my brother-in-law, so
it's like we're stuck.
Kind of removing the options.
You haven't upped your cat or
I'm not the
anything.
kind of dude who like holds grudges. I like to settle squash beef, especially with people like my family.
Trust starts with transparency. Understanding boundaries is an important building block to that. Trisha is wildly inconsistent, and hell, it may have been a lost cause to even try and understand what lines they would hypothetically draw, but it would have been better than doing nothing at all. At the worst, it would have allowed the podcast to end on a note of mutual agreement, something that proved impossible in the current environment and was only illuminated by their conflicting interpretations of the unaired episode where they attempted to settle those. But it wasn't just about Trisha's boundaries.
I think every single person, every group I've been with, Shane Dawson, David Dobrik, Ethan and his crew, like they're all these guys that are like, oh my gosh, you're so crazy. Like, what the fuck? She says this crazy stuff, her crazy life, like candles up her ass, all this stuff. And then as soon as like I get triggered by it, it's like, oh, too much. Oh, like she's just a bad person. She's just like mental. It's like all of a sudden it's like, you know, it's like if it's too much to like disengage. It's weird. I don't know.
There are no two ways about it. The infamous December episode where Trisha loses their temper at Ethan and the absent Ela was unacceptable behavior for anyone. And although their conduct never approached that specific degree of volatility again, it should have been outlined that they wouldn't receive the same treatment if that happened next time. I think Trisha almost believed their loyalty to the podcast was assumed because drama was naturally inbuilt. They repeat this on the Dr. Drew podcast, but they continue to focus on that one event, the storming out, and not actually what followed.
I'm good about this. Okay, let's go to
just
your
wanna make
stupid.
sure that
I don't like this
everybody's
segment. Just for the record, fan advice is a stupid segment.
Why?
We can do it. It's so dumb. What's the point?
I don't think Ethan's greatest issue with Trisha was their on-podcast behavior in the final episode. I think what more pushed him towards the conclusion that the partnership was beyond saving was the DMs that Trisha leaked themselves, where they once more lose their cool and Trisha announcing that they were leaving. How this probably wouldn't have happened if Trisha knew it wasn't going to work. And a couple of other notable instances, Trisha's explosive behavior had been rewarded with a seat at the negotiation table, with a therapist by their side. That didn't happen. From my perspective, Ethan felt like he'd done everything to keep Trisha happy and it still wasn't enough. And at that point, he decided there was nothing else he could do and concluded that accepting Trisha's resignation from the podcast was the smartest route. This wasn't the first time that Trisha had said they were quitting, but it was the first time that Ethan rubber stamped it. If there had been an established method in problem resolution beyond just pushing it towards the back burner, Trisha may never have considered leaving the podcast as an acceptable course to having their qualms recognized. They needed a system for these problems that was mutually acknowledged that if breached would bring about the show's termination. If Trisha did have some form of rationale to their behavior, then this would at least serve as greater motivation to not act in a way that they did after the show's downfall.
No, I knew the show would only ever end if you said
I can't end anything. I've never ended anything. Like even the most toxic relationships where people like cheat on me over and over and give me SE, like I still won't.
I've never cheated on you or given you an STD.
Thank you.
So we're good, doing good.
We're doing good.
It's very easy to point fingers at people directly involved in the drama. And to be honest, I think there is some responsibility that can be attributed there. But I also think that sometimes you need the right guidance. And in this case, that could only be provided by a professional therapist who didn't have any biases, any priorities, or a public personality to maintain. 100%. If you put the survival of the podcast above the survival of your friendship and the openness that you can express in it, then the podcast will suffer nonetheless. It is built from that friendship or frenemyship. not vice versa.
People have to understand that's what they've set up. I don't understand why they. I guess it's because people,
imbalance.
you know, they don't understand mental illness. They don't really understand it. And that's why we're here talking today.
But as much as we can assign blame to subpar advice, it was also Ethan and Trisha's decision to bring Dr. Drew on and abide by his wisdom. If anything, the presence of a personality like Dr. Drew showed that although the drama was personal, Frenemies was still just a spectacle, and it needed to be more than that to survive.
It's your last Halloween, Michael.
For the line crew and the go-getters, there's Granger. Supplies and solutions.
When Ethan started the H3 podcast channel, I think he hoped that it would allow him to present a more unfiltered, authentic version of himself. And in a way, he achieved that. However, he also experienced issues expressing that natural self and working into conversations with other guests, and often getting into drama himself. Drama and conflict aside, there was definitely a need to surround himself with people who would play off his best parts and ameliorate his worst. Nowadays, he does that pretty successfully with his crew. But back then, Trisha was the catalyst to bring H3 into a new era.
To Coachella versus Open Casket Funeral.
Who would have guessed that a few select comments could spawn such a tumultuous and memorable partnership in the YouTube history books? And in many ways,
I don't think even Ethan, but I, in a million years, wouldn't imagine something like this happening. Being straight up with you.
They did create something timeless, an experience that many were grateful for. Given their characters at the start of the podcast, people really didn't believe it would last more than a few episodes. But over time, that expectation changed, and the investment manifested as well. And for much of the time, the show appeared to undergo an evolution that transformed both Ethan and Trisha, moving from a dynamic of tense rivalry to strong camaraderie. With that in mind, there was a perpetual sadness that the podcast couldn't be something greater, as it seemed to be progressing in that direction for so long.
I keep saying I love this show. Like everyone just like stop the podcast. I'm like, please don't stop this podcast. Well, like, I go.
Well, let me read you what they said.
Without context, the episodes constructed a poignant story, one where Trisha had experienced so much maltreatment and desertion that their own responses were a product of their reception. In some ways, it seemed like a believable account, particularly given the cannibalistic nature of internet culture, and the conviction that Trisha spoke with made it all the more convincing. It was an occasionally difficult, but very sympathetic portrait of a person who was often judged quite harshly by the internet. Additionally, it was a sobering moment for a lot of viewers, and maybe prompted a fair bit of reflection on their behalf. However, often the problem with the internet is that it's a pendulum. It judges an individual either far too harshly or not at all, and in the deluge of sentimentality, some left their better judgment at the door. So many were sold on it, and maybe if some had detached themselves a little more, they would have picked up on certain lies designed to play up this story. I don't think this means that Trisha hasn't suffered in their life. I want to make that clear, but I do think they were too committed to it, too committed to a vision in their head that wasn't going to happen. Trisha is a person whose words have often held very little impact online because of how notably unreliable and melodramatic they are, but Frenemies changed the game for them due to the assumed realism of that podcast environment. Unfortunately, although it was a new format, it was the same old Trish, and given they've proven to have lied a fair few times prior, including during their debut appearance on the H3 podcast, it was almost impressive they managed to rope people in once more. I think in this story, Ethan saw himself in a position where he could be the start of a healthier online relationship for Trisha. He really did try to make that difference in their life, but they weren't quite ready to let Ethan in. And I think Ethan picked up on that because Trisha knew that the podcast wasn't quite where they wanted it to be. Trisha had greater plans for this story, and Ethan didn't. I think deep down they both apprehended its collapse, either due to Trisha's own nature or Ethan's response to it. And in a way, Ethan's subsequent reaction to Trisha's lashing out helped preserve the abandonment narrative in their mind.
I think every single person, every group I've been with, Shane Dawson, David Dobrik, Ethan and his crew, like they're all these guys that are like, oh my god, you're just so crazy. Like what the fuck? She says this crazy stuff, her crazy life, like candles stuff, her ass, all this stuff. And then as soon as like I get triggered by it, it's like, oh, too much. Oh, like she's just a bad person. She's just like mental. It's like all of a sudden it's like, you know, it's like if it's too much to like disengage. It's weird. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Then they abandoned.
Yeah. So
exactly.
Yeah.
The difference is at that stage, it was Trisha who left the podcast. It wasn't Ethan's fault. The one thing that I would say Ethan was unequivocally right to do, though, was to accept the end of the podcast. I have my problems with Ethan's reaction and response. I think I've made that clear. And I don't know the exact reasons behind his decision. But he couldn't have maintained it in good faith with the then present arrangements. It was the best thing to do, not just for him, but for Trisha as well and everyone around them. And honestly could have helped preserve a good friendship. To do so much in public on one hand can be raw and powerful. On the other hand, it blurs the line between persona and person, and Trisha is so bad with that. I know I've probably said that before, but it doesn't become any less true. And as the personal relationships become more and more intertwined, it was clear that these moments of conflict were only going to cause more harm to Trisha, Ethan, crew, friends, and family. At the start, I noted that a podcast sometimes could only run as long as there is a motivation. But in the case of Frenemies, the motivation to start the podcast was ultimately the motivation taken to end it, because what initially benefited them became a detriment as they grew closer, that friendship. Unfortunately, that friendship couldn't be saved because of what followed. Trisha's failure to distinguish between that public and private aspect of Frenemies, and Ethan being pushed past breaking point when reflecting on it. If you had a time machine, you could probably change a few things, and maybe it would have kept the podcast alive a little longer. But maybe it would have imploded even sooner. Who knows? I think the one element that may have been worth saving was the friendship itself, removing that betrayal and reflecting on the intent of the parties on that podcast. And with the family involved, maybe it would have been a more peaceful conclusion for all. Instead, we had one which dragged in other parties, over-invested fans to an extreme degree, and always ended up exhausting everyone actually involved because they couldn't say anything final. As much as it's entertaining for audience members and possibly cathartic for yourself to go mask off in a stream, a stalemate is never satisfying. And when you pit yourself against each other in such a way, that's all you're ever going to end up with. As we've seen, if you wrong Ethan, he's often not afraid to hold back. That's for better and for worse with him, particularly when he wants to rip into someone the way he would occasionally advise against.
We're pretty PC in general, too. Like, it's a comedy podcast, but I feel like we are pretty respectful at the same time. So, I don't know. I think some of y'all are just too sensitive. Like,
not a politician.
Yeah, exactly, and thank God for that. Thank you, by the way, for defending me.
That's kind of funny coming from
I feel
him.
like, you know, if you're watching the show and you're perpetually offended by things I'm saying, you may want to just stop watching, like genuinely. And I'm trying my best to learn when I can. And I did take and learn what I could from Matt, and I listened respectfully. But to say it's gross and disappointing, which is a comment I'm reading specifically, is just, I think you're too sensitive for the show. I really do. I'm sorry.
Ethan is a regularly cynical guy who tries to be socially conscious, but often fails, and will draw criticism for supposed pandering and double standards due to it. Trisha and their loyal fans clearly possess this impression that Ethan still only cared about the
Man, that statement, you know, that's a... oh my God, like, that should be said more, that he tries to be, you know, this PC guy, trying to pander, and somehow his fans defend him. Because he has like the same fans from Hassan ever since, you know, they did their own collaboration. But like, if they only share like the same energy for people that want to change, then I guess. But they're kind of like stuck in their own their own world, I guess I could say.
Podcast for its content and not for them. And maybe at the start when some people raised that concern, it was a valid point. But over time, I do think Ethan's intentions evolved, which I think is what made him so bitter at the end. I think he did care, and I think he was embarrassed at himself for caring.
You see me as a troll and a trickster, and nothing's true.
Right.
You see me as that way because you see through your own lens. You yourself are only seeing your own kind of shadow being cast on the world.
Trisha has a problem with the public sphere. As acknowledged early on, there's evidently an issue with the fact that they don't value the consequences their words can hold, and the implications they may have in a socially sensitive environment. Even if the comments didn't directly affect the people that were being referred to, there were others in those circles, and even on the podcast, that did feel that impact. Whether Trisha cared too much about themselves or not enough about others is judgment I'll leave down to you. But whatever the reason, it ultimately wasn't one made for a podcast, or the podcast. I know some will probably be disappointed that I didn't comment on Trisha's personal life more, particularly their contentious marriage to Moses. But simply put, I don't know enough about it. All I'll say is that I think Trisha needs people around them who don't condone their behavior just because it's Trisha. Give Trisha a reason to be better. Trisha can get better. It's just a shame that that wasn't the result of the podcast. It was a project that yielded so much for Ethan and Trisha, but also left the feeling that there could have been so much more. And it had long overreaching personal implications, leaving some questioning whether it was ever worth it. For what it is worth, though, one thing I've learned from reading too many comments was that even if it wasn't quite what it appeared to be, Frenemies was still a moment of divine escapism for many. Those who came home on a Monday night, tired and daunted by the week ahead, had something to look forward to. Two of YouTube's most
Yeah, honestly, from time to time I would watch it because it was really interesting. Whether I made it clear I don't like both of them, but it was so interesting to see as compared to like more like reality show type content. This one actually felt genuine, even though it was toxic as well. And it's crazy that people want this to return because, you know, they upload like TikToks of snippets that happen. And people still watch this as reruns.
recognizable and polarizing figures providing their informed and occasionally uninformed takes on YouTube drama. Frenemies was chaotic, problematic, and deeply flawed, but it was also a compelling story that many followed closely and wanted that fairy tale ending from. Sometimes fiction is more fanciful than reality, and this was one of those times. Yet, even if its legacy has been tainted, in many people's hearts, Trisha and Ethan will always be frenemies.
Right.
So yeah, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Big thanks to everyone who's watched this far. I want to give a big thanks.
Almost 3 hours. Oh man, hold on. I gotta stretch. Oh. I can't believe I watched that entirely. Oh my god.
To all the editors who worked on this, they've done a fantastic job. Really appreciate you guys. All their credits are on screen in the description below. It means a lot to me. I want to give a big thanks to my patrons and my $50 patrons, Hypercube, Esther Bedoya, Goldman, Velarex, and Seri Tish. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much for your...
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't say, you know, the cause of it was good, but it entirely like gave us like something interesting to like learn about, so, or to watch. So I guess things come to an end. I think when we want things to kind of have like a better ending, so unfortunately it doesn't happen like that because there's all this mix up that happens and it really messes with it.
the support. But I also want to give big thanks to any artist whose art was used in this video. Credits are all in the description again. If your art appears in this video and you're not listed, then just let me know. Also, as said in my previous video, I have a bit of a merch project going on right now. A link for that will be available as well if you want to check that out. And we have some pretty neat new products. I like the little battery pack we've got going right now. I think that's a nice little contraption. Just my personal opinion though. And also, one final thank you to Vance Global for sponsoring the video. As said, the link will be available in the description.
Okay, so I think I'll give my final thoughts, huh? So, hold on. I can't believe, I watched, I know I watched this earlier, but just watching it again, it definitely, sets a precedent. Okay, so, yeah, like I said, it's something that we were really interested in. It's unfortunate, they're considered family, so will they ever, ever reunite? Given, it might seem strange given that they've burned bridges, it's likely, they might, there's still, that small chance that they possibly would, get together. I still have hope for that. Even like Kimi said, as they know him as the YouTube cockroach. Like eventually all this drama is gonna get more, and so if they're able to make amends and kind of like talk to each other again, I kind of feel that would benefit them bothly, and kind of like maybe get like a better ending. But unfortunately, we don't know. Definitely something really interesting though. I think more people that have conflict should do something like this, because it definitely is more of an eye-opener, how all this stuff goes. Okay, so now that we got that out the way, all right, let me talk about what I have in plan. So what I have in plan is, there's there's this channel I saw. I know I'm mixing up a lot, but I'm just trying to think of all of this at the same time. So there's this one OG YouTuber that I want to watch with you guys and react to. I saw a video of him today, and he basically predicted everything that was going on YouTube. Mind you, this was 12 years ago, so I was shook, and I was like, what? He knew everything, dude. This guy is really intelligent, and I think he's one of the most genuine creators from what I saw. So yeah, we're gonna look into his channel. Hopefully he's doing good. I really wish nothing but the best to him, and I just wish people would give more credit and give more attention to what it's due. And with the right opinion, let me get this video a like. What I'm thinking to do is there's the Creep Show video. I want to watch that, and yeah, it should be interesting. So tomorrow I'm gonna watch the OG YouTuber. After that, we're gonna watch the whole Creep Show arc, because oh my god, I don't know why YouTubers can't stop getting in trouble. Well, thank you guys, I really appreciate it. Have a good night.